A man stepped into the hunter qualification exam. But the moment he made his move, he shocked the strongest S-rank hunter in the world, because he had forged an S-rank scabbard that even master craftsmen could not create. Every examiner on site was left in disbelief. The system appraisal confirmed it. This flame-layered scabbard had reached ultra-rare grade. None of them could understand how a mere candidate had forging skills on that level. What they did not know was that in his previous life, this man had already reached the peak of blacksmithing. With that very craft, he had survived until the end and won the final battle. But even after victory, humanity still did not truly survive, because the 6 demon gods who destroyed the world were terrifying beyond reason. Especially the last one, the demon god of the Sea of Destruction. Even after she died, most of the surface had already been swallowed by the sea of death she created. Thinking about it, Lee Se-hoon let out a bitter laugh. I fought so hard to survive, only to die in this damn sea anyway. Forget the heroes who barely survived. Even the hero tower that supported the earth had collapsed. And this cursed sea of ruin still refused to disappear, even after the demon god was dead. Just then, a man behind him chimed in. The way you talk, someone who doesn't know better might think you did everything yourself. That man was known as Mad Dog. The woman called Burst Dog also sneered. Pretty big mouth for a coward who pretended to be sick and lay around the whole time. It was obvious this team had a serious problem with Lee Se-hoon. Even Ice Dog muttered from the side, I said it before, he was just trying to ride the Legion's coattails. Lee Se-hoon sneered at their mockery. Without the equipment I forged, you all would have died ages ago. Now you suddenly have plenty to say. And he was Lee Se-hoon, the man known as the last blacksmith. His words made them tremble with anger. You little brat, you've got a seriously sharp tongue. The 3 people standing in front of Lee Se-hoon were the ones known as the 3 dogs. Their strength was absurd, but their personalities were just as twisted. They sided with neither humanity nor the demon realm, choosing to stay neutral instead. They acted however they pleased, chased only their own profit, and lived as opportunists in the gray zone. They were selfish bastards, but somehow, they survived until the end and played a crucial role in the final war. Lee Se-hoon had to admit it. Without them, they never would have won that battle. But he could not help wondering. If these guys had stepped in sooner, would the ending have been different? Right then, Mad Dog suddenly dropped to his knees. I'm finished. My organs are completely crushed. Burst Dog and Ice Dog were no better. Both of their hearts had been pierced and there was no saving them. Lee Se-hoon snorted coldly. If you people had helped earlier, you never would have ended up like this. Those damned 3 dogs had only cared about protecting themselves until the very end, turning a blind eye to everything in front of them. But the moment Lee Se-hoon turned around, his eyes widened in shock. In the front, Burst Dog and Mad Dog were already dead. Behind them, Ice Dog lay motionless on the ground. Lee Se-hoon sighed heavily to himself. The price of this victory was far too cruel. Then, tightening his grip on his hammer, he slowly stood up. Finding a suitable spot, he began striking it again and again. Lee Se-hoon spent 2.5 hours repairing every weapon they had carried, then placed each one beside its owner. After they died, he used their own weapons to build graves for them. And next, it was his turn. The towering tsunami in front of him would swallow him whole any moment now. Lee Se-hoon slowly raised his hand, knowing this would probably be the last time he ever used this ability. In the next second, he slammed his palm against his own chest. His fingers curled slightly, and he forcibly extracted his own bond from within his body. This was one of his abilities, called bond extraction. A clear, crystal-like stone appeared in the center of his palm. It was a unique skill belonging to him as a blacksmith, allowing him to extract special ore from a target he had formed a bond with. The result changed depending on the depth of the bond and the target's potential. But every time Lee Se-hoon used it on himself, the result was always worse than ordinary ore. If only he had awakened this ability sooner. If this extracted ore still had nothing inside it, then he would just have to accept his fate. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of metal strikes echoed through the air. Every 10 hammer strikes, the waves surged once, as if Lee Se-hoon's hammering had fused with the roaring tide of the Sea of Destruction. Even so, he could clearly pick out his own forging rhythm. Because every time that sound rang in his ears, he created something beyond imagination. Then, a flash of golden light burst out. As his final hammer strike fell, the last work of his life finally took shape. Lee Se-hoon looked at the sword with satisfaction. Its quality was excellent, and its effect was powerful. But in the end, it still had no special ability. He thought he could make something different, even if it was only forged from his own bond stone. But this sword was still far too ordinary. In the next moment, he drove the sword straight into his own heart. Rather than be dragged away and killed by the waves, he would rather end everything with his own hands. Even Lee Se-hoon had not expected that his final action in life would be hammering steel. In a way, he really was a madman. His body was swallowed by the waves, and as he let go of that final sword, he finally realized something. The sound of waves he had heard ever since he first awakened magic had been the sound of the sea of destruction, all along. If he had realized that sooner, maybe he should have convinced the three dogs much earlier. If he had fought a little harder for others back then, maybe so many things could have changed. At that exact moment, system windows began flashing endlessly before his eyes. Armament image has manifested, and it was all because of the final sword he had forged. Image skill, return to origin, has been released. Before Lee Se-hoon could even understand what an image was, the figure of a man appeared in front of him. Lee Se-hoon, what the hell are you doing? He jolted awake and instantly froze. Why am I at the entrance exam? If this was 31 years ago, then was this the entrance exam for Babel Tower? Or was this just his life flashing before his eyes? But the more he thought about it, the less that made sense. What he had just experienced was definitely not an illusion, which meant there was only one possibility. The final sword he forged really did have a special skill. Did that weapon activate return to origin at the very last moment? Just then, the teacher was already getting impatient. If you don't start taking this seriously, I'll kick you out. Lee Se-hoon could finally be sure. Through that sword skill, he had returned to the past. If he could master his abilities earlier and start training sooner this time, maybe he really could change everything. In the next instant, Lee Se-hoon grabbed the hammer on the table. Nothing else mattered to him anymore. The only thing that mattered now was seizing the chance he had been given. A faint smile touched his lips. This time he would protect everything, and it would all begin with this entrance exam. In this life, he would pass Babel Tower's trial, meet the three dogs again, and convince them to help save humanity. Lee Se-hoon brought the hammer down, and a strange, distinctive sound rang through the air. At the sound of the strike, the instructor's expression froze completely. He turned around in surprise. That candidate seemed different, and every time Lee Se-hoon struck again, that same sound rang out once more. The more the instructor watched, the more impressed he became. His movements looked slow, but every strike was steady and powerful. The sound was crisp, clean, and free of any noise. In the instructor's eyes, Lee Se-hoon's forging fundamentals were ridiculously solid. For a while after that, the instructor did not go anywhere. He simply stood nearby and watched Lee Se-hoon's every move. When Lee Se-hoon lifted the unfinished piece, everyone stared in shock, unable to tell how close to completion it was. Disbelief appeared on every face in the room. Another instructor could not help speaking up. Looks like we have an incredible candidate this year. If he submits that unfinished piece as it is, we can pass him right away. But in the next second, something no one expected happened. Lee Se-hoon smashed the unfinished piece apart. With one hammer strike, every instructor froze, completely unable to understand what he was doing. Lee Se-hoon only gave a faint laugh. The road ahead of me is still long. There's no way I'm letting trash like this see the light of day as a blacksmith's work. To put it simply, I don't like the half-finished thing I just made. The instructor behind him shouted in anger. You bastard, do you think this exam is a joke? But Lee Se-hoon's next words made every instructor pause. I want to redo my assignment. One instructor was about to refuse, but another voice cut him off. The man in a suit ordered them to bring Lee Se-hoon all the remaining materials. He wanted to see exactly what kind of finished product this candidate was trying to create. Once Lee Se-hoon received the materials, he began heating the ore again. With his current body, forging a true top-grade weapon was almost impossible. He lacked mana, he lacked strength, and he lacked time. So in this situation, he had only one choice. No one at the scene understood what he was trying to do, because they saw Lee Se-hoon pouring mana into the ignition stones. That was extremely dangerous. One mistake, and his magic furnace could blow up the entire exam hall. After injecting the mana, Lee Se-hoon threw all the materials in at once. In an instant, a dazzling 7-colored flame surged up from inside the furnace. Those who did not understand what was happening thought the furnace was about to explode and rushed to grab fire extinguishers. Even the assistant thought the same thing. But the instructor immediately stopped them and told everyone not to move. If Lee Se-hoon dared to do this, then he had to know exactly what he was doing. The instructor told the assistant to look closely at the flow of the flames. What Lee Se-hoon was using was the 5-colored demon flame. a high-temperature fire created by resonating 5 types of ignition stones. The technique required extremely precise mana control, but its advantage was just as clear. With only a small amount of mana, it could create an incredibly powerful heat. Many people at the scene were stunned. They never expected Lee Se-hoon's reckless move to actually work without blowing up the furnace. On top of that, they noticed the color of the flames inside the magic furnace starting to change. But the instructor understood what was happening. Lee Se-hoon was using resonance gems to boost the firepower while changing the flame's fixed attribute. He could tell that Lee Se-hoon had done this to forcefully shorten the forging time. But with only 300 minutes left in the exam, time was still painfully tight. The forging talent Lee Se-hoon had shown earlier was definitely impressive. But if that was all he had, then this was as far as he would go. Lee Se-hoon kept hammering the ore in front of him, knowing full well that time was running out. He had to move faster. Finally, after an hour and a half, the ore he had heated and cast earlier was hammered into a thin sheet. Seeing the result, Lee Se-hoon finally felt a bit satisfied. From here, things became much simpler. He grabbed his tongs, placed the sheet back into the furnace, and heated it again. Once the temperature reached the right point, he immediately pulled it back out. Now, all Lee Se-hoon had to do was repeat those steps over and over, and with every hammer strike, the piece slowly began to take shape. But at that moment, he suddenly noticed the webbing of his hand splitting open. Lee Se-hoon sighed inwardly. His mana had run out, which meant his protective barrier had disappeared. The first thing he needed to do after this exam was start physical training and simulation training. But right now, giving up was not an option. Instead, he tightened his grip on the hammer. Lee Se-hoon kept swearing. He could not afford to waste even a single second, and his body had already been pushed to its absolute limit. There were only 10 minutes left before the exam ended. It was tight, but for him, there was still enough time. His hands moved so fast they were almost a blur, as he quickly sharpened the blade's edge. Finally, Lee Se-hoon carefully checked the straightness of the blade one last time, with almost no time remaining. At last, the countdown ended, and he let out a long breath. The blood on his hands had already dried, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that he had forged this blade almost perfectly. After completing it, Lee Se-hoon also obtained a new skill, Flame Craftsman. The blade was called the 5-color flame blade, and its grade was high. It was a curved blade, engraved with 5 flame patterns, and when the flames gathered in the blade reacted with mana, they bloomed in multiple colors. It was a weapon that fully displayed the potential of its blacksmith. Depending on the nature of the mana poured into it, the blade's color and properties would shift slightly. Everyone present was shocked by the high-grade appraisal. The assistant from earlier came running over, already eager to announce that Lee Se-hoon had passed the exam. But the moment he opened his mouth, his voice stopped cold, because the instructor beside him clamped a hand over his mouth. "Be quiet. You're way too loud." 10 minutes later, Lee Se-hoon arrived at the instructor's office. After talking for a while, the instructor realized that Lee Se-hoon seemed deeply dissatisfied with the finished product he had just made. In the end, the instructor made a decision. He would not let Lee Se-hoon join the academy, and he asked him to withdraw his application. In his eyes, this place simply could not meet the standards Lee Se-hoon needed. Babel Tower's reputation was unmatched, but its forging department still had not produced any real results. Lee Se-hoon did not interrupt him because he knew that better than anyone. He had known it for over 30 years. Babel Tower's forging department would be shut down 8 years later due to poor performance, while Vulcan Academy would become the top forging school of the future. That was why the instructor wanted Lee Se-hoon to join Vulcan Academy and continue studying there. But the moment he finished speaking, Lee Se-hoon cut him off. "Professor, you're wrong. The best blacksmith academy won't be Vulcan. It will be Babel Tower Academy, the one I'm about to join." Lee Se-hoon's voice was full of confidence as he promised the professor that he would lead the academy's forging department to become the strongest in the world. Hearing that, the professor stared at him in disbelief, because that had once been his dream too, and now an absurdly young candidate had said it out loud again. If you really want to achieve something like that, then the first thing you need to do is become the top figure in this academy. Do you think you can do that? Lee Se-hoon said it would not be a problem. He could not guarantee everything, but among the students, no one would be stronger than him. The professor asked him another question. "Then tell me, do you know how Babel Tower selects the top freshmen?" Of course, Lee Se-hoon knew. Each department selected its top 2 students for an additional exam. From there, each department chose a chief candidate, and those candidates would compete for the final top freshman position. Babel Tower Academy divided its students into several training departments. The combat department was the main branch, while the academy also had various support departments. Each department then split into dozens of smaller divisions, spreading out like tree roots. To become the top student, one needed more than supernatural ability. They also had to be recognized by the entire academy as a true elite before they could claim that title. Hearing Lee Se-hoon explain all of this, the professor's arm trembled slightly. The professor spoke in a serious voice. What I'm about to say next is not advice from a professor. It is advice from a veteran blacksmith. Even if you become one of the best students in this academy, it will be very hard for you to find true success here as a blacksmith. You should go to Vulcan Academy instead. The professor had lived through it himself, so he knew better than anyone. In his eyes, that was the place where Lee Se-hoon could grow the most, and it was the only proper path for him. Those words made Lee Se-hoon smile instead. This professor really was decent. He cared more about a junior's future than his own position. Lee Se-hoon looked at him and said, "The environment won't affect me. Like I said, I'll make it happen. The academy I'm about to enter is Babel Tower, so I'll turn this place into the best school in the world." The professor immediately understood what he meant. Lee Se-hoon was saying that wherever he stood would become the best place. That was an absurd level of confidence. The professor slowly reached out and accepted Lee Se-hoon's handshake. This was not just confidence anymore. It was outright arrogance. But for some reason, he did not hate it. Then, the professor smiled. "I'll be counting on you from here on out." The moment their hands clasped, Lee Se-hoon's skill activated, and a bond formed between him and the professor. Lee Se-hoon smiled back. "I'll be counting on you too." A system notification appeared. A bond has been formed with Kim Min-chul. Current bond ability rank, E. Night, soon arrived. After Lee Se-hoon returned home, he immediately activated bond extraction. Before long, a piece of metal ore appeared out of thin air in his palm. Lee Se-hoon inspected it and found that it was a fairly rare material with a core containing fire attributes. The system notification displayed, "Fire melt iron, rare quality, mid to high-grade metal, capable of carrying flame, wood-like properties, possesses fire storage capacity." Compared to the materials he had used in his previous life, it was not much. But for his current situation, it was more than good enough. The only issue was that the material was too small. As expected, rare materials were not that easy to extract. Bond extraction was a skill that quantified his relationship with a specific target and extracted a never-before-seen type of ore from it. The problem was that his bond rank was still too low, making the skill clumsy to use. That meant he needed to raise its rank as fast as possible. On top of that, compared to the other students, Lee Se-hoon's stats were absurdly low. He had plenty of weaknesses, but considering he had returned to the past, he had no real reason to complain. Right now, he could not rush things. If he did, it would only backfire. He needed to set up a training plan for himself. Once he became strong enough, he would have enough time to crush those bastards from the Demon Legion. The Demon Legion did not just threaten humanity. They threatened the entire planet. Those 6 demon gods were pushing humanity and even the whole world, step by step, toward extinction. To stop them, Lee Se-hoon could not afford to be picky about his methods. Since he couldn't afford to let key future events fade from his memory, he had to prioritize weapons or skills related to memory. The first step of his plan was already complete. He had successfully entered Babel Tower Academy. Next, he had to find the 3 dogs. But just then, a notification sound interrupted his thoughts. When Lee Se-hoon saw the message, his eyes widened in shock. The system displayed, "Level has reached 1. Bond engraving has been added." A week later, at Babel Tower Academy, Lee Se-hoon had already wandered around several times. After all, this was the academy from 30 years ago. Getting lost was only natural, but this time, this should be the right place. Soon, he found Smith's room, which was the location of today's exam. After entering, he saw 2 tables inside, and another person beside him had also come to take the exam. At the front was the examiner's scoring desk. The examiner tapped out a rhythm as he said, "You look rather relaxed. You don't seem nervous at all." After saying that, he shot an annoyed glance at the professor beside him. "Can't you see everyone else is waiting?" And the man speaking was the vice dean of the academy. The professor sighed, clearly not wanting to waste any more words on him. "Vice dean, there are still 10 minutes before the exam begins." But the 2 teachers kept going back and forth, arguing without end. Lee Se-hoon watched them in disbelief. It seemed the forging department was not the only problem. Its relationship with the academy's higher-ups was also seriously tense. Now he finally understood why the professor had recommended another academy yesterday. The waters inside Babel Tower Academy were deeper than he thought, and the candidate sitting beside Lee Se-hoon did not look harmless either. His glare was practically radiating killing intent. Just from one look, Lee Se-hoon could tell this guy was probably an idiot with a massive pride problem. Still, out of basic manners, he greeted him first. "Nice to meet you." Just as Lee Se-hoon expected, the guy did not answer. Instead, he glanced at him like he was looking at trash. That left Lee Se-hoon completely speechless. He had not even done anything to him. Soon, a woman's voice suddenly rang out across the room. The moment they heard it, everyone turned to look. After she sat down, the vice dean finally spoke. "I was wondering when you would arrive, department head." But when Lee Se-hoon saw her face, he froze on the spot. He knew this person far too well. He never expected them to meet again like this. It really had been a long time. The woman had striking red hair, a beautiful face, and an intense presence. She was Yoo Eun-ha, the future dean of Borsippa Academy. Lee Se-hoon was completely stunned. He never thought this glutton would show up here. Yoo Eun-ha had once been recognized worldwide as an S-rank hero, with a unique skill that made her stronger by devouring weapons. Before Lee Se-hoon's regression, she had also been one of his long-time customers. Unfortunately, Yoo Eun-ha did not survive until the final war. The last thing she said to Lee Se-hoon before she died was that she regretted eating the weapons he had forged. When she died, it hit Lee Se-hoon hard. Humanity already had so few powerful fighters left, and from that moment on, there was one fewer. Back then, Yoo Eun-ha's combat power had been terrifying. On the front lines, she had blocked many attacks from the demon gods for humanity. Just then, Lee Se-hoon's thoughts were interrupted. The examiner at the front told them to focus because he was about to explain the exam rules. This exam would last 90 minutes. Within those 90 minutes, they had to create a weapon that could be used together with the themed sword from the previous exam. Then, the examiner slowly raised his fist. In the next moment, a flame suddenly burst from his palm. "In this exam, you must create your equipment using only alchemical forging techniques." The examiner glanced at the materials on the ground. A large amount of ore had already been prepared inside the room. The candidates were free to mix and use all of these materials however they wanted. One more thing, the weapons they created would be judged by department head Yoo Eun-ha and vice dean Hans Barmut, so they had to forge something they would not be ashamed of. With a wave of the examiner's hand, the exam officially began. The young man beside Lee Se-hoon stared at him with open disdain, but Lee Se-hoon did not pay him any attention. After all, only one person could be chosen in this exam. Then Lee Se-hoon tied on his apron and began selecting the ores needed for alchemical forging. While he was choosing, the blonde young man kept staring at him. "You're supposed to resonate pure mana with the materials, so the elemental mana doesn't go out of control. What, you think your mana will grow just because you keep staring at the materials?" Lee Se-hoon looked at him in annoyance. "What materials I choose has nothing to do with you. Who gave you the right to judge me?" The young man beside him remained arrogant. "People like you don't even deserve to be here." Just then, the professor quickly walked over to Hans Barmut. He warned Hans Barmut not to make any more comments unrelated to the exam, or he might affect his opponent. After hearing the professor's warning, Hans Barmut finally restrained himself a little. But when Lee Se-hoon heard that name, he froze for a moment. No wonder he thought this examiner looked so much like Hans Barmut. So this arrogant guy was the vice dean's son. The more Lee Se-hoon thought about it, the more absurd it felt. And the change on Lee Se-hoon's face had already been noticed by the young man. Hans Barmut seemed pleased that Lee Se-hoon had figured out his identity. In his eyes, one side was just a freshman commoner with a weak background and low mana. The other side was himself, born into the Barmas family, a prestigious alchemical forging household. His mana was so strong that he could even rival the top second-year students. After Hans Barmut finished choosing his materials, his disdain grew even stronger. Competing with someone like this felt like a complete waste of time. The result of this exam was already decided. He would win. Yoo Eun-ha, sitting in the middle, let out a cold snort. Lapis lazuli and aquamarine are materials with high mana capacity. Before she could finish, the vice dean beside her continued, "Correct. And they are attribute materials infused with water element mana." Hearing that, the professor also found it hard to believe. Water element mana was extremely sensitive to fire, making it very tricky to refine. Did Hans Barmut really have that much confidence? The vice dean gave a dismissive sneer. "That's outdated thinking. Modern alchemical forging has already moved far beyond that." The professor thought about it and had to admit there was some truth to it. Alchemical forging was not limited by location or setting. But, depending on the caster and the ore, the forging time could vary massively. In an exam environment like today's, it normally would not be suitable. The vice dean did not bother arguing much further. He would let the professor see for himself. His son was a genius who could synthesize any ore within 30 minutes. In the next moment, Hans Barmut finally began synthesizing his ore. A transparent magic sphere appeared and locked the two ores firmly in midair. Hans Barmut's resonance synthesis only needed 30 minutes. His level was already beyond that of ordinary freshmen, and he could even compete with second-year students. Hearing this, the professor finally understood. Short-time magic stone refinement, abundant materials, and alchemical forging rules. Everything had been planned in advance. This test had been tilted toward Hans Barmut from the very beginning. The professor glanced at the vice dean and cursed inwardly. This old fox was truly shameless. On the other side, Yu Un-ha kept staring at Lee Se-hoon, a hint of shock in her eyes. Because the materials Lee Se-hoon had chosen were one red and one white, bauxite and fire red stone, the other two examiners also fixed their eyes on Lee Se-hoon. Bauxite and fire red stone were the fire attribute counterparts of lapis lazuli and aquamarine, and both had extremely high mana capacity. The vice dean did not yet know Lee Se-hoon's actual skill level, but the arrogance in his bearing alone was enough to irritate him. If anyone was going to be arrogant here, it should be his son. Lee Se-hoon's movements also caught Hans Barmut's attention. In Hans Barmut's eyes, Lee Se-hoon had deliberately chosen ores that contrasted with his own. He sneered inwardly and called Lee Se-hoon an idiot. With the amount of mana Lee Se-hoon had, there was no way he could control fire red stone. Hans Barmut felt completely reassured. His opponent was not just stupid, but an arrogant lunatic who didn't know his limits. Winning this match would be even easier than he expected. But as he kept watching, his eyes slowly widened. Because at that moment, Lee Se-hoon activated his bond engraving skill. The system notification appeared. Bond engraving, fire connection, activating. Lee Se-hoon could equip bond stones on his body and use them. The currently available equipment slots were his left arm and right arm. Gradually, a flame extended outward from Lee Se-hoon's fist. The fire connection iron stone was being equipped to his right arm. In the next moment, a small flame appeared on his arm. Then, that flame burned brighter and brighter, quickly wrapping around half of his arm. Seeing Lee Se-hoon display such a technique, that entitled brat felt extremely annoyed. He could only force himself to believe it was nothing more than meaningless showmanship. Lee Se-hoon turned his hand slightly, and the flame power flowed entirely according to his will. With one spread of his hand, all the high-quality ores he had chosen floated into the air and began being tempered by the flames. Everything was exactly as Lee Se-hoon had predicted, almost perfectly without error. At this rate, it would not take long for him to forge that weapon. The examiner at the front watched his every move. The vice dean was surprised. Was Lee Se-hoon trying to resonate ores of the same attribute? What an incredibly foolish move. Attribute ores were supposed to resonate only with pure mana. If Lee Se-hoon forced it like this, the attribute mana would eventually go completely out of control. The vice dean kept sneering inwardly, barely able to suppress the smile at the corner of his mouth. That idiot was about to cause a huge disaster. But what he never expected was that Lee Se-hoon did not lose control of the mana at all. Instead, the flames grew even stronger. In the next second, an overwhelming pressure erupted from the ore and spread throughout the entire room. In that instant, both the professor and Yu Un-ha were forced to squint, barely able to keep their eyes open. Only the vice dean stared hard at Lee Se-hoon, his eyes filled with disbelief. In front of Lee Se-hoon, 4 or 5 streams of flame appeared. Beneath those flames, a crystal-clear longsword scabbard slowly took shape. Lee Se-hoon let out a long breath. Finally, it was done. For him, this kind of low-level forging was never difficult. The only problem was that his current mana was far too lacking, so it still took some effort. He reached out and grabbed the scabbard floating in midair. At the same time, a system notification rang out. Congratulations. You have completed the forging of the flame-layered scabbard. Grade, ultra rare. This scene left Professor Kim and Yu Un-ha completely stunned. Even the vice dean, who had looked down on Lee Se-hoon earlier, was now staring in disbelief. After all, even he probably could not pull off something on this level. The scabbard Lee Se-hoon forged was not only ultra rare in quality, but also came with the flame layering effect. Beside him, Hans Barmut even stopped what he was doing. He had never expected Lee Se-hoon to complete the synthesis this quickly, even faster than him. He thought it was impossible. Normally, using elemental mana should have made the process go completely out of control. Had he been wrong this entire time? And right then, a problem suddenly appeared in the materials Hans Barmut was synthesizing. Hans Barmut instantly panicked. From the front, the vice dean shouted, "Stop right now. If you keep injecting elemental mana into the magic stone, it might explode." Soon, the magic sphere in front of Hans Barmut began shaking violently. In the next second, a blast of air shot straight into his face. His magic sphere started cracking at an alarming speed. With a loud bang, Hans Barmut's forging completely went out of control. 15 minutes quickly passed. The materials for Hans Barmut's magic stone were shattered all over the ground. His face was filled with frustration. After finally getting the chance to take this exam, he had ruined everything with his own hands. Normally, once the judging ended, one of the two candidates would be chosen as the best candidate. But what troubled Professor Kim was that the other candidate had not produced a finished item at all, and his forging had failed after being affected by Lee Se-hoon. Professor Kim's eyes were also filled with regret. The blonde brat lowered his head, desperately trying to hide his tears. He felt bitter beyond words. Everything he had prepared for so long had gone to waste. His arm was still bleeding, and he never imagined he would end this exam by losing without even properly fighting. But at that moment, the vice dean came up with a nasty little idea. He adjusted his collar and said, since a student was injured during the exam, it would be best to cancel this test and hold a retest on another day. Professor Kim immediately disagreed. We cannot simply cancel an exam that has already taken place. In the end, this was caused by Hans's own carelessness, was it not? The vice dean had no shame at all. So Professor Kim believes test results are more important than student safety, is that right? Since Professor Kim's position was lower than the vice dean's, he eventually stopped bothering to argue. The vice dean spoke again. First of all, the fastest resonance time currently published in academia is 5 minutes, and yet, this person synthesized his selected materials in 6 minutes. In his eyes, there was no way a newly admitted freshman could do something like that. Completing resonance almost the moment mana was activated was simply unbelievable. Alchemical forging was originally a technique that used mana to create weapons when ordinary forging could not achieve the desired result. That meant alchemical forging did not pursue the traditional method of depleting the ore and pouring a blacksmith's life into it. Instead, it traced the origin at the core of the ore and drew out the ore's own life force. That was the true essence of alchemical forging, and that was exactly what Lee Se-hoon had just done. It was also the answer the forging world would eventually reach after countless rounds of trial and error. The method was so simple that it would become standard within a few years, so there was no need to treat it like some major secret. Facing this old man who had tried to suppress him from the start, Lee Se-hoon had no reason to explain everything. He simply said he had no idea what the vice dean was talking about. Hearing that, the vice dean burst into laughter. Looks like you really did use some dishonorable method. A freshman with no proper family background forged a rare weapon? Even cheating should have limits. Those words instantly pissed Lee Se-hoon off. Who the hell do you think you are? Just then, Yu-ha suddenly stood up. He is right. This really is absurd. Hearing what sounded like support, the vice dean grew even more arrogant. So you understand too, department head. This is absurd. And let us disqualify Lee Se-hoon for cheating and hold the exam again. But Yu-ha did not even bother responding to him. She walked straight past him. She arrived beside the scabbard Lee Se-hoon had forged and gently touched it with her hand. The instant she touched the scabbard, she felt something strange and extraordinary from it. Yu-ha thought this truly was absurd. Something like this had never been reported before, which meant Lee Se-hoon was the only one who had ever done it. But unexpectedly, drool was already pooling at the corner of her mouth. Yu-ha pointed at Lee Se-hoon. Student Lee Se-hoon, may I ask you a question? She wanted to take a bite of the scabbard Lee Se-hoon had just forged, and if that request was too much, could she at least lick it? The vice dean completely froze, unable to understand what she meant. Even Professor Kim beside him was lost. Did Yu-ha have some strange fetish like this? An awkward silence instantly spread through the room. By the time Lee Se-hoon left the exam site, evening had already arrived. This exam did not give him a clear answer on the spot. They only told him to go home and wait for the result. Fortunately, the process itself had gone smoothly. Lee Se-hoon had easily forged an ultra-rare weapon. Just as Lee Se-hoon had expected, the weapon's overall completion was not bad, but the fine adjustments were still rough. Still, remembering how the vice dean had trembled with rage felt incredibly satisfying. From the moment Lee Se-hoon entered the exam hall, he could tell that man was hostile toward him. At least now, he had finally blown off some steam. Just then, Lee Se-hoon suddenly realized that the name Barmut sounded strangely familiar. He kept scratching his head, trying to remember where he had heard it before. Soon, it came back to him. In his previous life, Burst Dog had once mentioned that name. Back when she was at Babel Tower, that bastard had forced her to do every dirty job, pushed the price of her weapons down to almost nothing, until a sudden explosion occurred. Burst Dog suffered a mana backlash because of that, which was why she became the way she was later. If not for that bastard, she never would have accepted partial body modifications. Back then, Lee Se-hoon had felt genuinely sorry for Burst Dog. Thinking of this, he slowly stopped walking. The blacksmith who left Burst Dog with lifelong after effects was named Barmut. In other words, Hans Barmut was that blacksmith. That guy really was a vicious, scheming piece of trash. Lee Se-hoon's first goal in this life was to contact the 3 dogs as early as possible and correct their twisted fates. With this, one of the dogs no longer needed to be a major concern. As long as he kept Hans Barmut under control and stopped him from messing around, Burst Dog would have no reason to lose control. Next, all Lee Se-hoon had to do was go back and wait for the notice. Meanwhile, inside the meeting room of Borsipa Academy, everyone present looked grim. Because Yoo Eun-ha had made a decision. Lee Se-hoon would be pushed forward as Borsipa Academy's top freshman candidate. Seeing everyone's reaction, Yoo Eun-ha also understood that the decision was a bit forceful, but in this academy, her word was law. Even if someone dared to object, they could not change her decision. Every professor was wary of Yoo Eun-ha, so none of them dared to oppose her directly. Instead, they offered suggestions that were basically objections in disguise. After all, Yoo Eun-ha had only recently taken over as department head, so doing something like this was not exactly appropriate. Hearing that, Yoo Eun-ha understood what they were really saying. It seems this vice dean had been eyeing her position for quite some time. The moment the vice dean spoke, many others echoed him. Exactly. We understand that his weapon was impressive, but perhaps a more careful review would be better. Professor Kim explained to the others, that is because you have not truly seen student Lee Se-hoon's fire butterfly sheath. The craftsmanship may still be lacking, but if you look at the way he used mana and how it worked together with the 5-color flame blade, the synergy was almost perfect. Another professor pushed back. I'm not sure. It was certainly surprising, but I don't think he has reached that level yet. Yoo Eun-ha cut off everyone's discussion. The weapon he forged this time may only be at 60% of its intended completion, or perhaps even lower. And that lack of completion is exactly what makes it so exciting. Then, Yoo Eun-ha announced another decision. If even after watching student Lee Se-hoon's demonstration as a chief freshman candidate, you still cannot accept my judgment, then I will resign from my position as department head. The moment she said that, everyone was stunned. None of them expected Yoo Eun-ha to make such a decision. 54 years ago, to accelerate humanity's evolution, the heavens sent down the Hero Tower. In response, the Abyss released the Demon Legion Swamp, which corrupted all living things. Along with the new opportunity came a massive disaster. And Babel Tower was born amid that very tide. The greatest academy in history rose from the center of the Pacific Ocean, and countless heroes were born from Babel Tower. That included the Ascended Emperor, Ludwig Schubert, and the freshmen gathered here might one day become part of that legacy as well. The old man's figure spoke to all the freshmen. Then keep moving forward. That is the duty of the heroes who climb Babel Tower. Lee Se-hoon sneered inwardly. Their real duty was not climbing the tower, it was fighting the Demon Legion in the future. Still, the Ascended Emperor Ludwig in front of them was actually a decent person. He was not nearly this friendly in real life, but his heart was not bad. Just then, the host took the microphone. Next, we will enjoy this year's top freshman performances. With those words, the Academy's outstanding students slowly walked onto the stage. Lee Se-hoon had never understood why so many people in his previous life loved showing off just because they performed well at the Academy. He never thought he would one day end up standing on this very stage. At this moment, there were 3 people in the arena, and the 3 of them were responsible for performing at this assembly. When Lee Se-hoon saw the robot being pushed out, he finally understood, so the Academy loved showing off too. The host waved his hand. The prop we will use for today's demonstration is a newly developed combat automaton. The prop he mentioned was automaton model number 9, produced by the Puppet Factory. Its name was Grem, and it was strong enough to fight evenly against a C-rank hero. It was a combat-type automaton, and since it had no special weapons, it specialized in close combat. The host's voice grew noticeably excited. First to appear is the genius of the combat department. Let us enjoy the combat demonstration of Archicuf Academy's top student, Jack Miles. After Jack Miles stepped onto the stage, the entire venue instantly fell silent. If Lee Se-hoon remembered correctly, he was the 3rd son of the Miles family. He had heard that Jack was born into a famous swordsmanship family, yet somehow became a pure hand-to-hand combat maniac. Soon, Miles took his fighting stance. He was determined to make today's performance look perfect. At that moment, a red light flashed in the robot's eyes. The host dropped his hand, signaling that Jack Miles could begin his demonstration. In the next second, the robot moved and charged forward instantly. Its speed was incredible. In the blink of an eye, it was already right in front of Miles. The robot threw a punch, and the sound of rushing wind echoed through the air. But no matter what kind of attack the robot launched, Miles dodged it with ease. His speed was terrifying. By the time the robot's final strike came down, Miles had already vanished from where he stood. When he appeared again, he was more than 10 meters away from the robot. He had roughly figured out the robot's attack speed and power. Now, it was his turn to counterattack. Then Miles shot forward like a bullet. He shouted as power gathered in his right fist. This punch carries 15 years of training. Let's see if you can take it. With a loud bang, Miles's fist slammed heavily into the robot. The audience was stunned. The force behind that punch was absolutely terrifying. After that single blow landed, the robot's armor was completely shattered. Lee Si-hoon was shocked. What was going on? He clearly remembered that Miles had died young in his 20s, and at the time he had only been an A-rank hero. But at this stage, Miles's talent was monstrous enough to be considered a once-in-a-decade genius. Even in Babel Tower, Lee Se-hoon could not understand why the Miles from his previous life had gotten stuck at a certain level and never broken through. Miles grinned. This robot isn't much after all. With his final punch, the robot's entire body was blown apart. With a heavy clang, the robot's head crashed to the ground. Only then did Miles let out a long breath. Man, it's been a while since I stretched my body like that. The host was so shocked, his mouth hung open. This performance was far beyond expectations. Miles had completely suppressed a robot with combat power comparable to a C-rank hero in an instant. Miles waved to the crowd. That was just basic stuff. The real problem is that C-rank robot was too weak. From the very start, he had shaken the entire stage with brute force, which meant the next performer would definitely feel the pressure. Just then, a figure slowly passed in front of Lee Se-hoon. The moment he saw her, Lee Se-hoon knew pressure did not exist for her. She was a top UR student, Inoue Erika, the eldest daughter of the Inoue family, one of Japan's 3 great houses. She was not an all-clearer, but with a mythic-grade weapon, she had risen to fame as an S-rank hero. Even though she would eventually fall and become a demon's retainer, making it risky to get too close, Lee Se-hoon still wanted her in his camp. But right then, Erika suddenly turned her head and glanced at Lee Se-hoon. That surprised him. Why was she looking at him out of nowhere? At this point, he and Erika had no connection at all. After thinking for a moment and finding no answer, he simply stopped worrying about it. For now, he would just watch what she could do. In this demonstration, the robot had been equipped with basic model number 9 armor, giving it roughly 5 times the defense of the standard model. The host shouted, "What kind of performance will student Inoue show us today?" Let's find out. A moment later, Inoue Erika slowly lifted the cage in her hand. Inside was a crow with blue eyes. Strangely, the crow's gaze looked exactly like Erika's. Then Erika released her ability and softly said one word. "Go." The crow inside the cage instantly flew toward the robot. But as it approached the robot, the crow suddenly shot upward at high speed. Lee Se-hoon could not understand how Erika planned to fight with just one crow. The crow kept flying higher and higher. The robot remained still, because its target had been set to the crow. That meant it could only attack the crow, not Erika herself. It slowly raised its arms and took a defensive stance. The robot had switched into defense mode, making it extremely hard to break through. After all, it had been designed for defense. Erika gently breathed out. The moment she did, a streak of blue light burst from the crow's eyes. Then the crow moved. It spread its wings, commanding the air like a general. Its body plunged downward, moving so fast it left afterimages behind. After each strike landed, the crow immediately flew away and attacked again from another angle, repeating the process again and again. Erika looked like she had done nothing, and yet somehow, she had done everything. She hadn't moved a single step from where she stood. 5 seconds later, Lee Se-hoon stared at the scene in shock. The robot now had a hole punched straight through it, and it was in a most fatal spot. Its core, its strongest defense, was like paper in front of that crow. With a heavy thud, the robot dropped to its knees. Only then did Erika call the crow back, and the crow shifted from its combat form back into its ordinary form. The entire venue erupted. It was unbelievable. With nothing but a single chain attack, she had pierced straight through an enhanced automaton. Lee Se-hoon broke into a cold sweat just watching it. If he simply showed off his weapon and left, he would definitely get booed. So next, he had to show some real skill too. And finally, the top student from Borsippa Technical Academy stepped onto the stage. Lee Se-hoon. After Lee Se-hoon appeared, Schubert, watching from above, slowly let out a sigh. This year's top freshmen were truly impressive. The forging department had not produced a top academy student in a long time, so he hoped this would not put too much pressure on him. Sitting beside Schubert was Yoo Eun-ha, who was serving as the demonstration supervisor this time. At this moment, Yoo Eun-ha believed Lee Se-hoon could definitely do it. Still, her own heartbeat had already started to speed up. With a soft whoosh, Lee Se-hoon slowly drew his blade. Now, it was his turn to perform. His previous exam works were a long blade and a scabbard. And now, the abilities of both pieces would be displayed before everyone. The crowd was stunned. Rare grade? Since when could the forging department do something like this? A freshman having a rare grade weapon was simply insane. The vice dean sneered. It seemed heaven was still on his side. At this rate, the position of Borsippa Academy's dean would eventually belong to him. He looked up at Yoo Eun-ha and sneered inwardly. Just pack it up and step down. That seat is mine. On the demonstration stage, Lee Se-hoon directly asked the host to switch to model number 8 and add 2 extra layers of equipment armor. Only then could he truly show his level. The host was completely stunned. Do you even know what you're saying? Model number 8 could withstand attacks from a B-rank hero to a certain degree, and Lee Se-hoon was asking to add even more armor on top of that. This put the host in an extremely difficult position, because this was not something he could decide on his own. So he suggested that Lee Se-hoon use model number 10 first, since such a sudden request would be hard to prepare for. But right then, Professor Kim's voice came from behind. I'm here. He walked in with a robot that had already been fitted with armor. This robot was on a completely different level from the previous two, and it could even withstand attacks from an A-rank hero, far beyond the B-rank standard. The host had no idea what to do. If this continued, the whole event might really descend into chaos. Lee Se-hoon was also surprised that Professor Kim had prepared a robot for him in advance. It seemed the professor really understood him. Professor Kim stood with his arms crossed, looking at Lee Se-hoon with only one message in his eyes. Go wild. And Lee Se-hoon understood exactly what he meant. The host gave up worrying about it. Since the equipment was already there, he might as well let them do whatever they wanted. All he had to do was announce the start. Once the match began, Yoo Eun-ha stared fixedly at Lee Se-hoon, wanting to see what kind of performance he would deliver. Her expectation was simple. She wanted him to turn the whole place upside down. Lee Se-hoon's gaze sharpened. He would not disappoint them. Then, he slowly raised his long blade and took a quick draw stance. The moment the blade came out, 5 colored flames shone from within the scabbard. At the same time, the robot entered defense mode. Miles shouted in excitement. This is crazy. I can't wait to see what he can do. But the blonde brat who had lost to Lee Se-hoon earlier looked completely unimpressed. In his eyes, this was just flashy fireworks. Lee Se-hoon was still nothing but a kid, with barely any mana. The flames infused into the 5-color flame blade naturally clashed with each other. Unless the user possessed extremely strong mana control, the backlash could easily injure them. Lee Se-hoon combined that with the properties of the flame-layered scabbard, tearing and compressing the flames inside. Then, using Flame Craftsman, he injected the flying rainbow flame into the inner side of the scabbard. This bypassed the problem entirely. Meanwhile, the robot across from him had already finished preparing its defense, waiting for Lee Se-hoon to attack. In the next instant, Lee Se-hoon unleashed the wildfire stored inside the scabbard, pushing all the mana in his body to the limit. The weapon skill of the flame-layered scabbard, Wildfire, detonated the compressed mana stored within. If Wildfire was triggered in this state, the forcefully compressed 5-colored flames would all explode at once. The professors in the audience were stunned. How is this the kind of power a student could unleash? The host also felt an ominous pressure filling the air. This commotion was getting way too big. After slashing out that strike, Lee Se-hoon slowly walked forward. He casually twirled the blade, then instantly sheathed it. Seeing the result, even Lee Se-hoon felt a drop of cold sweat run down his face. He had to admit, he might have gone a little too far. In front of him, a long trench had been carved into the ground, left behind by the slash. The host froze on the spot. This was simply beyond belief. In the end, the academy had no choice but to immediately dispatch a construction support team to the central auditorium to repair the floor. And with that, the midterm evaluation for the academy's top student demonstration officially came to an end. 10 minutes later, the sound of high heels echoed through the hallway. Lee Se-hoon sat on the sofa, waiting for Yoo Eun-ha to arrive. A moment later, Yoo Eun-ha walked in. Sorry for making you wait. I was helping clean up the arena just now. That made Lee Se-hoon feel a little awkward instead. I should be the one apologizing. I was the one who carved a trench into the central auditorium. I should have held back, but I accidentally went overboard. Yoo In-ha froze for a moment. What are you even talking about? I'm not here to lecture you. Only then did Lee Se-hoon realize she had not come to scold him. Yoo In-ha quickly explained, "You misunderstood. I called you here for another reason." But just then, her stomach suddenly growled. Lee Se-hoon actually knew about her ability, but he could not expose it yet. After all, Yoo In-ha had never revealed that ability to anyone. She was probably trying to eat his weapon. Yoo In-ha cleared her throat. "Anyway, I'll pay 10 times the market price for your weapons." What she wanted to buy were Lee Se-hoon's 5-color flame blade and fire butterfly sheath. But Lee Se-hoon could only apologize and refuse, because he had no intention of selling those weapons to anyone. Right then, a system notification appeared. Contact has been established with target Yoo In-ha. Yoo In-ha suddenly grabbed Lee Se-hoon's hand, and a bond instantly formed between them at E rank. She said seriously, "That weapon combination of yours is amazing. I want you to sell it to me. I really need it." Lee Se-hoon had not expected the bond to form this quickly. Before his regression, this had only happened after Yoo In-ha devoured several of his weapons. But regardless, this was a perfect opportunity. In the next moment, Lee Se-hoon activated bond extraction, and blue mana spread from their clasped hands. Soon, another system notification sounded. Bond has been extracted from target Yoo In-ha. The system displayed Greed Iron obtained, top grade quality, a metal that generates heat by devouring iron. It corrodes any iron it touches, melts alloys, and absorbs them into itself. A black-red spiked sphere appeared in Lee Se-hoon's palm. The moment he saw it, he finally understood something. When Yoo In-ha heard him say he understood, her face lit up. "Then name your price, I'll buy it." But Lee Se-hoon refused immediately. "That's not what I meant." Just then, a man's voice came from outside the door. It was Professor Kim. He said the headmaster's award ceremony was about to begin, and told Lee Se-hoon to come with him at once. A look of disappointment appeared on Yoo In-ha's face. She said quietly, "You should go with him then." Before leaving, Lee Se-hoon said only one thing to her. "See you later." After the two of them left, Yoo In-ha's stomach kept growling. It had been a long time since she last ate a high-quality weapon. At that moment, in Babel Tower Academy's Central District, Oro Main Building, Balduke Manor, Lee Se-hoon followed Professor Kim as they slowly walked toward the headmaster's office. Professor Kim reminded him to mind his manners in front of the headmaster. After all, the headmaster had generously forgiven the damage Lee Se-hoon caused to the auditorium during the demonstration. More importantly, the headmaster was someone on a completely different level from them. Lee Se-hoon absolutely could not upset him. Lee Se-hoon told Professor Kim not to worry. When it came to handling people, he had things completely under control. A moment later, Lee Se-hoon finally met the headmaster. The man asked knowingly, "So you are student Lee Se-hoon?" This headmaster was a true hero of humanity, without question. Before Lee Se-hoon's regression, he had fought the 6th demon god alone and died taking it down with him. On top of that, he had another identity, and all clearer. The headmaster slowly said, "Every weapon you displayed in today's demonstration was fascinating. I cannot say they were flawless, but they were enough to make me look forward to your future performance." Lee Se-hoon immediately caught the word flawed. He had expected it, but hearing it still made him want to throw the 5-color flame blade and fire butterfly sheath straight back into the furnace. Still, his talent and effort had been recognized by the Academy's higher-ups, and the headmaster would grant him 2 rewards. Hearing that there were rewards, Lee Se-hoon could not help feeling excited. More importantly, he was allowed to state what he needed for both rewards. So, Lee Se-hoon asked for rewards that could improve his mana and memory. The headmaster accepted the request without hesitation. Then he slowly raised his hand. A moment later, his hand slowly descended. The instant it fell, a golden door appeared in the air. Then a golden rune emerged outside the door. 2 treasures dropped from that rune. One was ink-heavy darkness, which possessed the trait of devouring everything except darkness itself. The other was Dream Sprout, which contained dreamlike mana that crossed the boundary between reality and dreams. Lee Se-hoon found it unbelievable. Ink-heavy darkness was already rare, but Dream Sprout was even harder to obtain. Both were extremely precious treasures. He would not be able to fully control them right away, but he could already imagine their future uses. The headmaster chuckled. "Are you satisfied with these rewards?" Lee Se-hoon immediately answered that he was very satisfied. "They're flawless. Thank you very much, headmaster." And just like that, Lee Se-hoon obtained 2 high-quality rare ores from the headmaster before leaving the office. The headmaster stood on the second floor, quietly watching Lee Se-hoon's departing figure. Then, the rune from earlier suddenly spoke. I really don't know what's going on in your head. You gave that child 2 rewards and such rare ores at that. The headmaster exhaled a faint puff of smoke. He simply has enough capacity to digest them. The rune asked, Is that so? Looking into the distance, the headmaster slowly said, He does look like a child, but it feels like an old man is living inside him. At that moment, the headmaster finally opened one eye. That means he is unfathomable. The rune sounded surprised. Even you see him that way? The headmaster had also realized something else. Even he could not fully measure the limits of Lee Se-hoon's talent. An hour later, inside the classroom building, someone tried to invite Hans Barmut to lunch. But Hans said he already had plans with Senior Howard. That person was shocked. Senior Howard? Don't tell me you mean the top third-year student of Borsitba Academy. The blonde brat looked extremely pleased with himself. Our families have known each other for a long time, so we meet up occasionally. He said he wanted to give me some advice about academy life. So he asked to see me. While they were talking, Lee Se-hoon slowly walked into the classroom. In that instant, Lee Se-hoon's gaze changed. He had to keep a close eye on that blonde brat and warn him not to cause trouble. After all, this concerned the future of the 3 dogs. When the blonde brat saw Lee Se-hoon's eyes, a chill ran through him. He could not understand why Lee Se-hoon was showing him such intense hostility, especially those eyes. They looked as if they wanted to devour him whole, sending cold sweat down his back. But he had not really provoked Lee Se-hoon. Aside from that exam, this was basically their first proper meeting. Yet, Lee Se-hoon kept staring at him like a ghost, as if silently warning him, If you dare cause trouble, I'll eat you alive. When Lee Se-hoon finally looked away, a faint smirk touched his lips. At least this guy still knew his place. He knew enough to be afraid when their eyes met. The blonde brat trembled with anger. He had actually been frightened by a single look. A moment later, Professor Kim also entered the classroom. Everyone, quiet down. Today's class would be taught personally by Professor Kim. Since this was the first class, he decided to begin with self-introductions. Professor Kim had someone push in a projection alloy stone. He slowly picked up the stone. This stone is dozens of times more sensitive to mana than ordinary ore. So when you inject mana into it like this, the weapon form you imagine in your mind will appear quite easily. At that moment, a weapon appeared in Professor Kim's hand, and it was exactly the form he had just imagined in his mind. Lee Se-hoon was slightly shocked. Professor Kim truly deserved to be a hero ranked among the world's top 100 craftsmen. And Lee Se-hoon could feel that Professor Kim was no ordinary person. He even sensed an extraordinary power from Professor Kim's contract stone. Professor Kim slowly continued, Because it is so sensitive, it is difficult to use as an actual weapon. But it can reflect traits you may not even realize you have, allowing you to examine yourselves. That is why weapons made from projection alloy are called avatars. In the forging department, you will introduce yourselves by creating one such avatar. They will be displayed in the main building for 1 week, so give it your all. Everyone was shocked. Projection alloy of this grade could easily cost more than 10 million won per piece. As expected of Babel Tower Academy, even self-introductions here were ridiculously extravagant. But after many students tried it, Lee Se-hoon realized that this year did not seem to have anyone with top-tier talent. Lee Se-hoon could not help letting out a long sigh. These people were basically a bunch of fools. Compared to the geniuses he had seen in his previous life, they were worse than dirt. Then Lee Se-hoon slowly stood up. He was the last person to go on stage and introduce himself. He picked up a projection alloy stone, and his image quickly appeared above it. Since he was already one of the Academy's top figures, there was no need to hold back anymore. Since he had chosen this path, he might as well do it properly and make sure no one dared to look down on him again. So this time, Lee Se-hoon decided to go all out as well. At the very least, he would completely shock these freshmen. In the next moment, a massive cloud of smoke surged upward and covered the sky above the entire classroom building. It was the energy aftershock created when Lee Se-hoon used the projection alloy stone. That sword was later placed in the exhibition hall, where it sat unnoticed for 20 full days. Everyone thought it was just an ordinary longsword, but when the Academy's genius beauty saw it, her eyes instantly lit up. As expected, a weapon forged by the top student of the blacksmithing department was no ordinary thing. The precision of its internal structure was something ordinary people could never comprehend. Meanwhile, Lee Se-hoon was still hammering non-stop. He had to make sure every strike landed with absolutely no difference in precision. Every student present was stunned, because from the start until now, Lee Se-hoon had not shown even a 0.1 second margin of error. Even the teaching assistant standing behind him could not help wondering what the professors and assistants could possibly teach this child. He was just too much of a genius. So the assistant simply skipped over Lee Se-hoon and decided not to guide him for now. 1 hour later, the students finally completed the assignment for the class. Lee Se-hoon carefully observed the works they had finished. When he saw those swords, he clenched his fists again. These weapons were way too low grade. It looked like he wanted to smash them all apart again. In other people's eyes, these half-finished products were already good enough. But Lee Se-hoon could not stand them. Just as he was about to swing his fist and shatter the swords, he suddenly heard a voice. "Are you planning to break them again?" The assistant's words made Lee Se-hoon pause. Wait, was he not allowed to break these things? The assistant spoke almost pleadingly. "Please don't destroy them again. After this week's forging class ends, those have to be delivered. Do you not know where the student's budget comes from? Babel Tower provides support based on our external weapon sales data. So what exactly are you dissatisfied with this time? Your body? Your mana? Or the weapons you made?" Lee Se-hoon gave an awkward smile. "Right now the biggest issue is my body. I need to make training equipment that suits me. I need to refine ink-heavy darkness, but my base stats are so low that I can't even attempt it." The assistant offered an idea. If it's for forging, wouldn't using a buff effect be faster than training alone? Hearing that, something clicked in Lee Se-hoon's mind. Right. Why had he not thought of that before? In his previous life, he had been too obsessed with avoiding that kind of method, to the point that he never seriously considered it. But for his current self, it was practically perfect. Now that Lee Se-hoon had returned to the past, his body was still extremely weak. With a buff active, he should be able to refine ink-heavy darkness. Lee Se-hoon immediately bowed to the assistant. "Thank you for the guidance." The assistant did not think much of it. After all, there were very few things he could actually teach Lee Se-hoon, and this had only been a simple suggestion. Then, Lee Se-hoon's eyes fell on the sword in the assistant's hand. The sword was not forged very well. In fact, it looked rather rough, at least in Lee Se-hoon's eyes. He said, "I noticed the way you hammer earlier. You consume too much mana while forging. Try reducing it to about 70% of your current usage. Then concentrate all your power into a single point. That should improve your forging level noticeably. For your current state, it will be much more effective." After saying that, Lee Se-hoon turned and left. This could be considered his return gift, since the assistant had given him advice first. What he did not know was that the assistant's face was full of embarrassment. A freshman had just guided a teaching assistant. That was simply unbelievable. Still, the assistant took Lee Se-hoon's words seriously and turned his gaze toward the hammer on the table. Time quickly moved to the afternoon. Babel Tower's professor had said before that the academy encouraged every student to study independently. They could audit courses from other academies and even take dozens of electives in a single semester. However, everyone still had to complete their major courses. If they failed 3 times, they would be expelled. Students had the right to enjoy freedom, but they also had to bear the consequences of their choices. Lee Se-hoon's next stop was UR University, where there were also things he needed to learn. Soon the train arrived, and Lee Se-hoon stepped off. But what he never expected was to run into Erica the moment he got off the train. The 2 seniors behind her immediately told Lee Se-hoon to move aside and stop blocking their way. Lee Se-hoon did not understand where these random guys had come from, or why they were being so rude. "And what are you going to do if I don't move?" Those words immediately made the 2 seniors boil with rage. But just then, Erica suddenly spoke and asked Lee Se-hoon where he was going. Lee Se-hoon said he was heading to UR Academy to see if there were any elective courses worth taking. Erica jumped at the chance. "I'm from UR Academy. I can show you around." But the seniors behind her reminded her that there was a meeting later and that Erica had to attend. Hearing that, Erica's voice suddenly turned cold. She shot the seniors behind her a sharp look. "I'm not interested. Get lost." That left the 2 seniors completely stunned. The difference in her attitude was way too obvious. For Lee Se-hoon, though, this was a good thing. Having someone familiar with UR Academy as his guide would make things easier. After that, the 2 of them completely ignored the seniors, and Erica led Lee Se-hoon back to the academy. On the way, Erica asked what kind of elective course Lee Se-hoon wanted to study. What Lee Se-hoon wanted to learn about was buff effects, preferably the kind that could enhance physical ability without interfering with forging. Erica recommended barrier arts, but Lee Se-hoon felt that sounded more focused on defense and probably did not suit him very well. Then, Erica took an invitation envelope out of her pocket. "You may be misunderstanding it. What matters is how you use it." Right after that, she placed a barrier on the envelope and began chanting the spell. Erica told Lee Se-hoon to try tearing the envelope open. Lee Se-hoon shook the envelope carefully and found that she seemed to have increased its hardness. But that was not entirely accurate. The envelope still retained its original properties, only hardening instantly when struck by a strong impact. Erica seemed rather proud. For something this complex, you may need a professor to assist you. The professor of barrier construction married into our family as a son-in-law from the Kaze family. If you meet it, I can introduce you. As she spoke, Lee Se-hoon felt that the pattern on the envelope looked somewhat familiar. Soon he understood the principle behind it. So that was it. It was just an illusion. In the next moment, Erica stared in disbelief. The envelope she had just handed over was torn cleanly in half by Lee Se-hoon. She could not understand how Lee Se-hoon had broken her family's barrier technique in such a short time. Lee Se-hoon tossed the torn envelope aside and clapped his hands. Barrier arts really are useful. Thanks for the hint. Now I'm going to register for the course. As for you, you can go have lunch with those two guys who keep following you around. After Lee Se-hoon left, the two seniors hurried over. Miss, are you all right? Looking at the torn envelope on the ground, Erica felt deeply conflicted. She had even given him an invitation, yet Lee Se-hoon had torn it up and thrown it away without a second thought. He really was a strange guy. The next day, inside the ritual arts department, many people kept looking at Lee Se-hoon. In truth, he was normally a fairly ordinary presence and should not have attracted that much attention. But Erica, standing in front of him, had raised his visibility to the maximum. Many people were curious how he had gotten involved with her, and some even said they had seen the two of them together yesterday. Lee Se-hoon sighed inwardly. It seemed gossip followed him wherever he went. Besides, if Erica really liked him, some kind of bond should have formed between them already. Still, was this class screening students or something? After Lee Se-hoon registered, they actually told him to take a test first. Soon, Erica brought Lee Se-hoon to the barrier construction test site, which turned out to be a forest. In front of them, several figures seemed to be searching for something, but they still had not found anything. Lee Se-hoon guessed that this exam was something like a treasure hunt. It sounded pretty troublesome and nowhere near as straightforward and thrilling as the combat department. But for him, this level of test was child's play. After circling around once, Lee Se-hoon finally realized that this whole place was nothing but an illusion. As his foot slammed heavily onto the ground, the barrier in front of him shattered instantly. The teacher spoke in shock. You have already passed the exam. Afterward, the barrier professor soon received a report. Could the young lady be interested in that genius boy? The man in front of Perry did not say much. He simply showed Perry the photo he had taken on his phone. The photo showed Lee Se-hoon and Erica walking together on the street. Looking at the photo, Perry could not help sighing. Thanks to you people, registration numbers have tripled, but I honestly can't bring myself to be happy about it. Since Miss Inoue had also made a request, they would add an extra test this year using the Dazzle Soul Maze. The Dazzle Soul Maze was a barrier that distorted the senses and caused people to lose their bearings. At its core, it was still a barrier technique, but if someone knew nothing about rituals, they might not even realize they had fallen into it. That made it extremely difficult for ordinary people to break through. However, Miss Inoue had not helped Lee Se-hoon at all, and he had still broken through the Dazzle Soul Maze with his own strength. This greatly surprised the barrier professor. At the time, he announced to everyone who had passed the exam, "You are now members of this class. Starting now, we will use a second test to divide you into groups." Soon, a red-haired student volunteered. Then let me go first. What he was really thinking was that this time he had to leave a good impression on Erica. Perry casually waved his hand. This test is simple. You only need to maintain the barrier in front of you and break it using mana alone. In the next moment, a red magic barrier appeared at the red-haired student's feet. Once the examiner announced the start, he immediately pressed his palm against the barrier. The examiner would grade them based on time, so they had to be fast and precise. This was a web structure barrier with a spider at its core. The spider would sense the mana flowing along the threads and constantly try to escape. As long as the spider core remained, the barrier would not disappear, and the web would regenerate endlessly. Soon, the red-haired student started struggling. His mana was not enough to methodically cover the entire ritual pattern, so he chose a rougher method: overwhelm the spider core with speed. In the next moment, mana burst from his palm again, and he finally passed the test. However, it took him 2 minutes and 23 seconds. Perry commented, "Next time, focus more on understanding the structure." After passing, the student even glanced sideways at Erica. But Erica did not pay him any attention at all. Everyone who came after him failed. Several students in a row were unable to break the spider barrier. Those with poor results would have to start from the basic class. After their exams ended, the next person to step forward was Inoue Erica. She did not rush to act. Instead, she first examined the structure of the spider barrier and soon found the core of the web-like formation. The core point was actually hidden at the very edge of the spiderweb. In the next instant, the entire spiderweb barrier shattered. Everyone present found it unbelievable. How had she done that? She had dismantled the entire ritual pattern and collapsed the barrier at the same time. The spider core on the barrier had also been sliced into pieces. That was top-tier skill. Inoue Erika truly showed why she would become an S-rank hero in the future. Inoue Erika took 22 seconds in total, which was already a strong performance. But with the textbook method, she could have been 2 seconds faster. Then, the teacher looked in Lee Se-hoon's direction. "Last one, Lee Se-hoon. Step forward for your test." The teacher sized Lee Se-hoon up. At first glance, there didn't seem to be anything special about him. It seemed the teacher would have to confirm things personally. At this moment, Lee Se-hoon did not rush to break the barrier. Instead, he crouched down and carefully observed the structure of the spiderweb. Everyone around him was curious. Had he not realized the test had already begun? Why was he crouching there? Lee Se-hoon ignored their comments because he had noticed that this barrier shared something in common with ink-heavy darkness. If it did not reach a certain critical point, it would keep repairing itself. That meant refining ink-heavy darkness required applying several precise stimuli all at once, and the ratio had to be extremely accurate. The teacher also had no idea what Lee Se-hoon was doing, so he walked over to check the situation himself. But at that moment, Erika suddenly stopped him. "Please do not interfere with his test." Left with no choice, the teacher had to stop. At the same time, Lee Se-hoon's hand moved. A surge of flame power flowed into the centerline of the spiderweb barrier and slowly extended downward. Soon his flame caught the spider core. Lee Se-hoon wanted to see whether he could apply this exact stimulus ratio to refining ink-heavy darkness. The field fell silent. Before anyone could even react, Lee Se-hoon had already broken the barrier. Lee Se-hoon was just as excited inside, because he had finally found a direction for refining ink-heavy darkness. After completing the test, he turned and left. After all, he had already learned almost everything he wanted to know, so there was no point staying any longer. The examiner checked the time. It had taken about 7 minutes and 45 seconds. But another chief examiner felt that the time did not really matter. Right now, it might have taken him 7 minutes, but the next time Lee Se-hoon faced the same barrier, he would probably break it in seconds. Because he had not merely broken a barrier, he had created an entirely new formula to dismantle that ritual. At that moment, Erika looked at Lee Se-hoon with a meaningful gaze, feeling a faint thrill of excitement. If he truly combined ritual arts with forging techniques, then the weapon he eventually forged might be terrifying even to her. Not long ago, Lee Se-hoon had submitted an application for ultimate forging, allowing any interested mentor to contact him. The teacher who helped submit the application originally thought not many people would be interested. But just 3 minutes after it was posted, his message list was completely flooded. Thinking about how Vice Dean Barmett had no one on his side, while his son had been pushed down to second place, the contrast was painfully obvious. No wonder he was in such a terrible mood. Just as the teacher was about to randomly choose a mentor to guide Lee Se-hoon, his eyes widened in total disbelief. Because he saw that department head Yoon-ha had stated she would personally observe student Lee Se-hoon's ultimate forging. That afternoon, Lee Se-hoon looked helplessly at Yoon-ha. He really had not expected Yoon-ha to come all this way for something like this, especially when she was so busy. Although she insisted that she was only here to inspect Lee Se-hoon's abilities, he did not believe her at all. Then, Lee Se-hoon began the first stage of refinement, processing ink-heavy darkness. There were many ways to process ink-heavy darkness, but the harshest method was called the dark curtain processing method. First, ink-heavy darkness had to be placed inside a completely pitch-black space. Then, mana had to spread through it like water, separating the impurities using only mana. During this process, the volume of ink-heavy darkness would shrink, but its purity would increase. It sounded simple, but in reality, it was almost the same as reconstructing the substance itself. Seeing this, Yoon-ha froze slightly behind him. He had already completed the first stage this quickly. Lee Se-hoon judged that compressing it to 1/4 was his current limit. Any smaller, and the material's performance would not hold up. Soon, the refinement entered the second stage. This stage was just as important. One mistake in control, and the fire temperature could deviate massively. In the next moment, Lee Se-hoon poured all the flames into the furnace. Then he circulated crimson flame mana to filter out the correct heat. Flames stabilized in this state were called Guardian Wildfire, and they maintained the exact temperature from the moment of formation. Soon, the refinement reached the third stage. This stage involved striking ink-heavy darkness with a hammer wrapped in guardian wildfire. The key was to keep hammering without interruption until the distortion caused by wildfire's properties completely disappeared. Yu Eun-ha could not help feeling a little pained as she watched. Even if Lee Se-hoon was immune to flames, that did not mean he could not feel pain. How much of a toll had it taken on him to get this far? From there, Lee Se-hoon continued shaping the weapon. Several hours passed in the blink of an eye. Yu En-ha had already grown sleepy and could not help yawning beside him. Soon, night arrived, and Yu En-ha had completely fallen asleep, somehow still standing. At this point, the refinement had already continued for 4 full hours. Refinement was essentially the process of hammering over and over, and Lee Se-hoon had been hammering for more than 4 hours straight. Now, the ink-heavy darkness had been filled to its limit, and the blazing flames inside it had begun to transform. At that exact moment, the distortion within the material finally stopped. Then, Lee Se-hoon melted down the newly formed ink-heavy darkness. Yu Eun-ha knew the next step as well. He would pour it into a mold prepared in advance, using casting instead of forging. But with such an enormous amount of darkness inside the mold, its properties would eventually warp and deform. Just when she thought Lee Se-hoon was going to fail, the scene in front of her nearly made her jaw drop. Lee Se-hoon used the barrier-breaking formula to slow down the changes in ink-heavy darkness, then built a mana circuit inside that tiny opening. In the next moment, his finished product finally appeared. A system notification sounded. Ink bamboo bracelet completed. To shatter prejudice, one must sometimes attempt the reckless with one's own body. Though it has not fully drawn out the material's full potential, the skill that forged this new possibility is enough to be called a human achievement. Another system notification followed. Aaron Dominion acquired. Evaluation, D rank. Only then did Lee Se-hoon let out a long breath. Today's effort had not been wasted. He had successfully forged the item. The item was called the Ink Bamboo Bracelet, a mid-grade rare item. Its ability was to absorb and store the wearer's mana, allowing the use of the skill Explosive Tide Surge. At that moment, a smile finally appeared on Lee Se-hoon's face. It was a hard-earned success. But the moment Yu En-ha saw the freshly forged item, her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. She instantly became a little embarrassed. She did not want this to happen either, but she was hungry and could not control it. Lee Se-hoon pretended not to notice, because the situation was just too awkward. Yu En-ha quickly changed the subject. So this is resonance? Impressive. Lee Se-hoon nodded. I made 4 in total. Individually, they aren't that strong, but with a little tweaking, they could even trigger a set bonus. If a set bonus could be triggered, then this item's power would become quite substantial. Lee Se-hoon looked at Yu En-ha. You went through so much trouble for me, but I still can't give you the weapons. I'm sorry. I don't know if this can serve as compensation, but I hope you'll accept it. Yu En-ha's stomach had been growling hard earlier, so she was probably genuinely starving. Yu En-ha's ability was extremely powerful, a unique technique called Soul Furnace. Then, she activated her ability and tried tasting the Ink Bamboo Bracelet. Surprisingly, it tasted very good, a bit like crispy batter bits, which happened to be one of her favorite flavors. Yu En-ha felt the match was almost ridiculously perfect. What Yu En-ha did not know was that Lee Se-hoon had long since gotten used to adjusting things to her taste, so the item had naturally ended up with a flavor she liked. In a way, this might actually make it easier to raise her favor toward him. It was a shame to eat something this well made, but Yu En-ha really could not stop herself from drooling. Then, Yu En-ha asked Lee Se-hoon when he planned to deal with the 5-color flame blade and the fire butterfly sheath. But Lee Se-hoon had no intention of selling them right now. Yu En-ha thought he was dissatisfied with the price, but that was not the case. He was keeping them for the upcoming subjugation course. Besides, hunger was the best seasoning. Once Lee Se-hoon had equipment he could part with, he would offer it to Yu En-ha first. Hearing that, Yu En-ha finally felt relieved. Then I'll look forward to what you bring me. That was about all Lee Se-hoon had to forage for the day. Yu En-ha told him to leave already, since it was getting late, and at least go back to get some rest. But the moment Lee Se-hoon stood up, he suddenly lost his balance. Yu En-ha instantly appeared in front of him and caught him in her arms. She looked worried as she asked, "Are you okay? You worked all day. Are you exhausted?" The position made Lee Se-hoon feel a little awkward. "Looks like I overestimated my stamina. Sorry for the trouble." Yu En-ha glanced out the window. "Then let me take you back to your dorm." Lee Se-hoon immediately tried to refuse, and Yu En-ha thought he might be afraid of heights. Lee Se-hoon stammered, "I'm not afraid of heights. It's just, Won't people get the wrong idea? However, Yu Un-ha had already decided to carry him back, bridal style. The position was definitely awkward, but having someone take him home was still a good thing. While the two of them flew through the air, a woman stood below. But she had no idea that the two figures were flying above her. And she remained there, waiting in vain for Lee Se-hoon's reply. The next day, a news post shot to the top of the school's trending list. Erica had stood in front of the forging department's main building for 3 hours yesterday without leaving. Lee Se-hoon knew she had probably come to find him. If Erica had something important to say, she would likely come again later. Just then, a man wearing a bandana walked into the room. Nice to meet you all. Starting today, I'll be in charge of the tool application course, and his very first lesson was this. This class is moving to the training center first. Whoever arrives last has to run 20 laps around the track. Lee Se-hoon clearly remembered this class being a theory course, but he did not bother thinking too much about it. For now, he had to hurry to the training center. Yet, as he ran, Lee Se-hoon realized the distance between him and everyone else was growing larger and larger. In the end, he became the last person to arrive at the training center and was punished with 20 laps. Lee Se-hoon didn't waste any time arguing. He simply turned around and started training again. The teacher had never seen a student with stamina this terrible. He even started wondering whether Lee Se-hoon had actually passed his intermediate forging class. After that, the teacher stopped paying attention to Lee Se-hoon and began teaching the other students. Tool application was originally just a theory class about weapon structure, but because the flame blade hunts were currently ongoing, the class format had been changed. The people who specifically hunted heroic rank or higher blacksmiths, who forged fire element swords, were collectively known as flame blade hunters. Lee Se-hoon had heard of them before. Even in his previous life, he had never managed to solve this case. And the main focus of this class was swordsmanship. Seeing that Lee Se-hoon was still running, the teacher told him to stop and come over for class. Then the teacher handed him a sword. Let me see whether you're suited for swordsmanship. Try swinging it. The sword itself was not that heavy, but Lee Se-hoon was currently wearing the ink bamboo bracelet, so moving freely was not easy. Then an idea flashed through Lee Se-hoon's mind. It was not exactly brilliant, but for his current state, it was the most suitable move. In the next moment, Lee Se-hoon swung his sword, only for the professor to block the attack cleanly. Seeing that, many students started laughing. His movement is so slow. Did those laps tire him out? Though his stance is actually pretty good. But the professor had sharp eyes. He could tell that Lee Se-hoon's strike was actually excellent, because that sword clearly knew where it was supposed to hit. Still, the professor felt that Lee Se-hoon was being too impatient. Just then, Lee Se-hoon charged toward him again. In that instant, his eyes changed. The moment the professor saw that look, he froze on the spot. Lee Se-hoon quickly swung his sword, and that slash looked like it truly meant to take off the professor's arm. The professor found it unbelievable. How could a student radiate killing intent like this? While the professor was stunned, Lee Se-hoon had already placed the sword against his neck. The professor never expected himself to be pressured by a student from the technical track. He asked where Lee Se-hoon had learned his swordsmanship. Hearing that, Lee Se-hoon was the one who froze. Why did that move actually work? He had only come up with the technique 10 minutes ago. He quickly explained that he had learned it by watching other people fight on social media. To his surprise, the professor actually believed him. You managed to imitate their swordsmanship? Are you interested in learning swordsmanship properly? I can write you a recommendation letter for Archicuf's body control class. That afternoon, Lee Se-hoon arrived at Archicuf, but the scene in front of him was honestly awkward. A blonde brat was clinging tightly to the leg of a long-haired teacher, while the teacher kept telling him to leave. How many times do I have to tell you? I have nothing to teach you. This man was the retired S-rank hero Ma Guangju, known by the title Swordbreaker. Lee Se-hoon naturally knew him. In the past, Ma Guangju had been an old drunkard, so seeing him as a professor now felt strange. Ma Guangju turned and asked who Lee Se-hoon was and why he had come. Lee Se-hoon answered, I'm Lee Se-hoon, a first-year student from the forging department. I came with a recommendation letter from Professor Carlos. The blonde brat beside him muttered, he's this year's top student from Borsiba Academy. Ma Guangju looked Lee Se-hoon up and down, but no matter how he looked, Lee Se-hoon seemed completely ordinary. Then, Ma Guangju suddenly spoke to the blonde brat. If you really want to learn my swordsmanship, I can agree to it. But first, you have to defeat this guy in front of you. Lee Se-hoon agreed to the duel as well. The rules were simple. 1 round, and the first valid hit would decide the winner. The blonde brat had already taken his attack stance. The moment the start was announced, he rushed toward Lee Se-hoon. Ma Guangju glanced at Lee Se-hoon and sensed that his entire body was relaxed. He had released all the tension in his body, converting it into flexibility. According to textbook logic, the correct response to that state would be grappling, not striking. Just as Ma Guangju thought that, the blonde brat adjusted his approach accordingly. Ma Guangju looked exasperated. This was exactly why he hated talented brats. They had not even properly started fighting, and they were already playing mind games. There was no fun in it at all. At that moment, Lee Se-hoon also charged toward the blonde brat. But what he did not expect was that the instant he rushed in, the blonde brat suddenly stopped moving. Then the blonde brat bent down quickly and locked both arms tightly around Lee Se-hoon's waist. That terrifying strength caught Lee Se-hoon slightly off guard. He immediately activated the mana inside the ink bamboo bracelet and triggered explosive tide surge. With a loud bang, Lee Se-hoon drove his fist straight into the blonde brat's nose. The blonde brat could not believe it. He had no idea why Lee Se-hoon's speed had suddenly become so fast. Lee Se-hoon looked toward the professor and laughed. So, does that count as my win? Just like that, he defeated the blonde brat from the sword hall. The professor sighed. Starting tomorrow, come here for practice. Hearing that, the blonde brat was overjoyed. I'll definitely be here on time tomorrow. And that included Lee Se-hoon as well. He would also be coming to the sword hall tomorrow. After that, the blonde brat bowed and left first. But the professor told Lee Se-hoon to wait, saying there was something he wanted to discuss privately. The professor wanted to see the sword technique Lee Se-hoon had used earlier against Carlos. Lee Se-hoon nodded. Understood. I'll show you right now. In the next moment, he rushed straight toward the professor. But the professor casually struck once and instantly shut down his attack. Lee Se-hoon's expression shifted slightly. That really was an instant takedown, with absolutely no mercy. The professor commented, the idea is good, but the execution is crude. Do you think a sword technique that turns into a weakness the second time you use it is normal? If you had ever proudly taught this move to someone else, I would have broken all 4 of your limbs long ago. What the professor did not know was that the person who had taught Lee Se-hoon this move was none other than the professor himself in his previous life. The professor told Lee Se-hoon to wait and see. He would build a proper body for this crude little technique. After that, Lee Se-hoon took his leave. I'll be here on time tomorrow. The professor snorted inwardly. This kid sure was blunt. When Lee Se-hoon walked out, he found that the blonde brat had not left. Instead, he had been waiting by the door. The blonde brat stopped him and said there was something he wanted to give him. What he handed over was the same kind of invitation Erica had given Lee Se-hoon earlier. Unexpectedly, the blonde brat had prepared one for him too. It was an invitation to the noble society, basically a gathering place for students who prided themselves on coming from famous families. So that was why Erica had wanted to find Lee Se-hoon. She had wanted to give him this. The blonde brat said that although there were plenty of annoying people there, it would still be a good opportunity for Lee Se-hoon. He was genuinely grateful to Lee Se-hoon, because thanks to him, he had been allowed to take this class. At the very least, he wanted to show this much sincerity. Lee Se-hoon thanked him. It seemed this blonde brat was actually pretty easy to get along with, and not a bad person either. So far, Lee Se-hoon had applied for barrier construction and body control as electives. He was also considering whether to take another elective over at Borsippa. Just then, someone suddenly blocked Lee Se-hoon's path. The person grabbed his arm. Excuse me, can we talk for a moment? When Lee Se-hoon saw who it was, a flash of disbelief passed through his eyes. The girl in front of him stared at the bracelet on his wrist and asked, "Did you make that bracelet yourself?" Lee Se-hoon nodded. "I did. So what? Do you need something?" The girl was practically drooling. It was her first time seeing such a refined weapon on a student, so she immediately asked, "Can I enchant your weapon?" A system notification appeared. Contract established with target Leah. Her name was Leah Claudel. In the future, she would be the person who could raise a weapon's grade by 2 levels through enchantment. A genius among geniuses who created legendary weapons, and even someone said to have upended the enchantment industry. Just then, Leah suddenly shouted, "This was made from rare grade heavy ore?" She had been staring at Lee Se-hoon's bracelet for quite a while, muttering non-stop. "If I add a few formulas here, no, that would weaken the enchantment effect." The more she looked, the more she pulled at her hair, as if she had no idea how to handle the problem. Lee Se-hoon had not expected her to be this strange. This time, the problem was not whether the equipment was good enough. It was that she wanted to do too many things. The bracelet was made from heavy ore, yet its compatibility was absurdly high. There were too many formulas she could insert, making it painful to decide. Lee Se-hoon slowly put down the cup in his hand. If that's the case, then it should be fine. After all, he had several more bracelets like this, so Leah could keep experimenting on them. Those words instantly made Leah's heart race. It looked like she was about to dive headfirst into researching enchantment formulas. While Lee Se-hoon and Leah were talking, another person walked out from behind them. The man slammed his palm onto the table in front of them. "I have something to say to you. Come with me." His tone made Lee Se-hoon extremely uncomfortable because it was not a request. It was an order. Lee Se-hoon immediately guessed that this man was probably one of Erika's subordinates. When he did not move, the man raised his voice. "Did you not hear what I said?" Lee Se-hoon answered calmly. "If you have something to say it here." The man sighed. "I came to make you apologize to Miss Erika. You tore up the invitation she gave you in front of everyone, didn't you?" Lee Se-hoon shot back. "Erika was the one who told me to tear it. What does that have to do with me?" But the man did not care. "You have a point, but you still need to go back and apologize." That made Lee Se-hoon extremely irritated. "Did Erika send you here?" The man shook his head. "This was my own decision. It has nothing to do with Miss Erika." Hearing that, Leah adjusted her glasses. "That is complete nonsense. Everyone knows you're that young master's servant." As it turned out, Erika had an older brother, and the man in front of them served the siblings in name, but actually belonged to that young master. Hearing this, the man was startled. He had not expected his identity to be exposed on the spot. In the next moment, his aura flared. He clearly knew Leah as well, and said coldly, "A washed-up woman dares to act this arrogant? Are you still living in that delusion of yours?" Facing his pressure, Lee Se-hoon felt nothing at all. The man continued, "Babel Tower is filled with talent. There are plenty of people better than you. Being allowed to apologize to the young lady is your honor." Lee Se-hoon shut him down with a single sentence. "You're talking about yourself, aren't you?" The man flew into a rage and summoned demon wolves to tear into them. Seeing this, Lee Se-hoon merely raised his hand slightly. Facing the demon wolves in front of him, there was not a trace of fear in his eyes. He waved his arm lightly, and all the demon wolves vanished. As expected, they aren't made purely of mana. You use a dagger as the medium, allowing illusions to attack physically, right? The man's eyes filled with shock. "How did you know?" Lee Se-hoon twirled the dagger in his hand. "This is child's play to me, but now you're in trouble. Since you attacked me first, it's only natural for me to strike back, right?" At that moment, a system notification sounded. "Bond engraving, gluttonous iron blade, has been activated." Lee Se-hoon wiped the residue from the corner of his mouth. That dagger tasted seriously awful. This ability came from the greed iron he had extracted from Yu Un-ha. As a top-grade material, it allowed Lee Se-hoon to devour iron-based substances. In the next instant, Lee Se-hoon shot forward. He activated Explosive Tide Surge and drove a punch straight into the man's stomach. That blow was more than enough to do some serious damage. With a loud clang, Lee Se-hoon shattered the mirror space on the spot. In front of him, the man's technique was pathetically fragile. Then, Lee Se-hoon looked at Leia beside him and asked if she knew any good enchantment courses he could take. He wanted to study them. After all, he had heard that over in Ancient Enchantment, there was an incredibly talented senior named Leah Claudel. Meanwhile, after taking Lee Se-hoon's punch, the man limped away from the scene. But just then, someone suddenly blocked his path. "Excuse me, I'd like to take a look at that dagger." And that person was none other than Miss Erika. The man immediately handed the dagger over to Erika, with great respect. Erika told him not to report this matter to her brother. She would personally inform the head of the family. Just as expected, the weapon used as the medium had an anti-confiscation enchantment carved into it. Erika could not understand it. Had Lee Se-hoon created a counter-skill based on Professor Robert's theory and her family's sorcery? In her mind, Erika made a judgment about Lee Se-hoon. His refining aptitude was at least S rank or higher, while his sorcery aptitude was probably only E rank. Soon, Lee Se-hoon received a system notification. Connection established with Inoue Erika. That surprised Lee Se-hoon. How had he suddenly formed a bond with Erika out of nowhere? Did she secretly watch his fight with her subordinate? Either way, Lee Se-hoon had already received the payment he deserved. He had taken 10 daggers from that man. They were too crude to use directly, but if combined with the Black Spirit Mage, they could still be useful. More importantly, Lee Se-hoon had actually been looking forward to Professor Kim Min-chol's class. But in the end, he kept hearing theories he already knew by heart, which made the class painfully boring. Professor Kim slowly said, "I believe the explanation so far has been sufficient. Now, let us begin the practical exercise." Even with the same metal, its form can change completely depending on how the mana array is adjusted. The application of this form transformation determines the diversity of weapons. Therefore, as blacksmiths, you must fully understand the potential of the metal in your hands. With a light sweep of his hand, Professor Kim restored all the metal blocks that had been transformed into weapons back to their original state. Today, we will use these iron ingots to practice metal deformation. First, manipulate the mana array to create a 3 cm indentation in the center of the ingot. Then, restore it. The assistant handed each student an iron ingot, one in them. These ingots have been adjusted to react sensitively to deformation, so please handle them carefully. Lee Se-hoon looked at Professor Kim and fell into thought. It seemed Professor Kim had not completely rejected magical refinement after all. Once the class began, everyone quickly made a mess of things. Some turned their ingots into puddles, while others twisted theirs into bizarre shapes. Professor Kim looked utterly speechless, and worse, they could not even restore the ingots to their original forms. Just then, Lee Se-hoon handed his completed ingot to Professor Kim, and almost at the same time, another hand submitted one as well. Hans Barmut. The blonde brat chuckled at Lee Se-hoon. Didn't expect your speed to be about the same as mine. Have you been practicing in secret too? Professor Kim had not expected only 2 people in the entire class to complete this stage, so he allowed them to proceed to the next one. He then demonstrated a sample structure and told them to transform their ingots into that shape. From there, they manipulated the internal structure of the ingots, like twisting a Rubik's Cube. The blonde brat glanced at Lee Se-hoon again. He felt that his own speed and completeness were slightly better, so this time, he thought he could win. After they completed the shape, Professor Kim gave them another one to form. The blonde brat's hands moved rapidly as he modified the structure of the ingot. Before long, he completed the shape, looking extremely satisfied. I really am a genius. No matter how you look at it, this is perfect. But Professor Kim slowly called his name. Hans, restore the iron ingot to its original form. Hans was confused. Why did he have to restore it to its original form now? Still, he followed Professor Kim's instruction, but very quickly, he realized something was wrong, because the mana array inside the iron ingot had been completely damaged. Only then did Professor Kim begin explaining. The fact that this ingot could not withstand the metal deformation means your handling method was wrong from the very beginning. But Hans immediately argued, I only followed the method you taught us, Professor. However, Professor Kim had already told them earlier that everyone had to fully understand the potential of the metal. If the altered array could not be repaired, then it was not transformation, it was degradation, and that would become a major variable, affecting both quality and performance. Therefore, from now on, they had to thoroughly check these aspects. Hans glared at Lee Se-hoon in frustration. Had this guy noticed it from the start? But Hans refused to believe that. To him, Lee Se-hoon had only been standing there blankly. But in the next moment, Lee Se-hoon's fingers moved rapidly, and his mana manipulated the metal block into constant transformation. Before long, the deformed iron block was restored to its original shape. The other students were all stunned. Even Professor Kim stared at Lee Se-hoon in shock. Student Lee Se-hoon, can you show us that transformation again? Lee Se-hoon looked a little troubled. It seemed Professor Kim had misunderstood. The reason he could restore it earlier was because the ingot had been modified for high sensitivity for student use. If it had been an ordinary ingot, even he would not have been able to do it that easily. In the next moment, Lee Se-hoon created the same shape again, then restored it once more. Only then did Professor Kim finally understand. The key was that this ingot had been modified for sensitivity. It was such a simple principle, yet Professor Kim had somehow failed to notice it. Flame craftsman Kensei, the strongest blacksmith to clear every floor, had created a deformation formula during his time as an S-rank hero. For decades afterward, no one had managed to break it. The deformation formula was a fundamental problem that every blacksmith had to face. Soon, class ended, and Professor Kim specifically kept Lee Se-hoon behind. He took out a rare ore radiating a red glow and gave it to Lee Se-hoon as an entrance gift. After all, Lee Se-hoon choosing Babel Tower had helped him a great deal. The system notification displayed. Flying Swallow Gem, rare grade, contains high purity energy. Absorbing the essence of the Flying Swallow Gem can permanently strengthen Crimson Flame power. As it turned out, Professor Kim had heard that Lee Se-hoon controlled Crimson Flame, so he had prepared this gem especially for him. Lee Se-hoon was truly grateful. Without a doubt, this would become an important boost for him. Aside from that, Professor Kim had one more thing to ask. He wanted to know whether Lee Se-hoon was interested in an elective course he taught. If Lee Se-hoon guessed correctly, Professor Kim was talking about weapon origin studies. What Professor Kim had not expected was that Lee Se-hoon actually knew about the course. Lee Se-hoon nodded. Weapon origin studies was one of the best funded courses at Babel Tower Academy. So with the opportunity right in front of him, there was no reason to hesitate. After all, before his regression, Lee Se-hoon had never even heard the name Kim Min-chul. It seemed this professor's ending in his previous life had not been good. But right now he was undeniably a highly regarded professor, so Lee Se-hoon signed up immediately. The two shook hands firmly, and Professor Kim said, "I look forward to working with you from now on." A system notification appeared. Affinity extracted from target Professor Kim. Connection level with blacksmith Lee Se-hoon has risen to level 1. Lee Se-hoon obtained flame-infused iron once again, and this time it had gained an additional property. It could store more flames internally. If metal could be extracted from the human body, then naturally the human body itself could also be forged and processed. When multiple types of attribute mana existed inside the body, they would clash with one another. For a blacksmith who required precise control, that was fatal. That was why most blacksmiths usually chose only one attribute best suited to their aptitude. But Lee Se-hoon was different. The mana in his body that suppressed heat had already been properly depleted, and his mana-drained body was now absorbing the essence of the flying rainbow flame. As a blacksmith, what he had to do now was construct a mana circuit inside his body, specifically designed to carry the flying rainbow flame. Lee Se-hoon let out a long breath. In the end, what he was forging was himself. A system notification sounded. Attribute mana has been strengthened. Crimson Flame has risen from F-grade quality to E-grade quality. More notifications appeared one after another. Lee Se-hoon obtained S-rank Divine Refinement Art, and all of his stats increased significantly. However, this body refining technique was still difficult for the current Lee Se-hoon. After all, he had never truly tried using materials on his own body before. In his previous life, someone had once told him to use every available resource to forge his body. So this time, Lee Se-hoon would use every resource he could to complete this process. Whether that resource came from a future ally or an enemy, in this life, he would leave no regrets behind. The next day, Lee Se-hoon returned to the classroom building. This class was about giving their previous works a final polish before handing them over for external delivery. Everyone started hammering like mad again. But Lee Se-hoon felt like his body was a total mess. It could not keep up with the rhythm at all, and his movements were misaligned everywhere. Even so, he had no time to slowly adjust himself. No matter how badly his body was being pushed past its limits, he did not stop swinging the hammer. After shaping one sword, Lee Se-hoon placed it into a bucket of water to cool it. Soon, he let out a long breath. The sword in front of him should be enough to complete the repair. He did not have time to deal with the rest. If he could finish everything to an acceptable standard, he might be able to secure more budget. But instead of doing that, it was better to focus on completing even one piece properly. So Lee Se-hoon began sharpening the weapon's edge. 2.5 hours passed in the blink of an eye. This time, Lee Se-hoon heard the sound of waves again. It was the sound of the world cracking apart. Whenever he heard that sound, he knew he was about to forge something extraordinary. It was not a brief sharpness, but a cold, piercing edge engraved into the blade itself. In the next moment, a white light flared across the sword. The sword was called the White Light Greatsword, a work that showed the willpower of a true master blacksmith through basic technique alone. At the same time, Lee Se-hoon also learned C-rank White Light sword style. The system evaluated the sword. Its grade was still rare, and injecting mana stones could further increase its sharpness. Considering that Lee Se-hoon had only used ordinary iron ore, this result was acceptable. The skills he had possessed before his regression were slowly returning, and that filled him with anticipation. The others were not nearly as lucky. They felt the assignment was so difficult that some even started wondering if they should just drop out. The next morning quickly arrived. Lee Se-hoon had arranged to meet Leah here because he wanted to personally observe her enchantment process. To avoid being seen by her parents or anyone else, Leah had deliberately chosen a remote location. To Leah, enchantment was everything. She absolutely could not let anyone learn it. Anyone except Lee Se-hoon. A moment later, Lee Se-hoon and Leah arrived at the anicap smithy. The moment Leah entered, she shouted, "Grandma, we have a guest. Come out and greet him." Her grandmother nearly had her eardrums blasted apart by the noise. "I'm not deaf. Why are you shouting so loudly?" That said, this grandmother looked surprisingly young. When the grandmother saw Lee Se-hoon, she looked startled. "Who is this boy? Don't tell me he's your boyfriend." Leah could not even be bothered to answer. Lee Se-hoon introduced himself first. "I'm Lee Se-hoon, the top first-year student of Borsipa Academy." He also learned that the grandmother's name was Helena. Helena told Leah not to waste time and to get to work quickly so they could finish early. Since freshmen had arrived this week, they had a huge amount of work to handle. After that, Leah led Lee Se-hoon to the enchantment workshop. Lee Se-hoon glanced at the items hanging on the wall and realized that this old one's skill was even better than he had expected. He could not understand why someone as capable as Helena would run a hardware shop in a place like this. Then he noticed something that looked like a makeup palette. It contained powders made from ground mana stones. He had heard that the standard setup used 8 colors. But Helena was using far more than that. Was her job to repair damaged enchantment formulas with these powders? Leah chuckled. Correct. This way, we can make money, practice enchantment however we want, and not worry about material costs. It's basically perfect for us. As she spoke, Leah picked up a pen and slowly drew a pattern on the bottom of a pot. In the next moment, that pattern glowed with golden light. Lee Se-hoon had come here because he heard Leah and the others were in a slump. The person he had beaten earlier had once mocked them, calling her a failure who flunked every exam and couldn't even keep her department head position. But now that Lee Se-hoon had seen everything for himself, he felt like he finally understood the cause of their slump and the way to fix it. Being able to devote oneself completely to work like that was a talent in itself. While Leah was busy, Lee Se-hoon wandered around the area. Soon, he noticed several items that could resonate with mana circuits and grant special effects. At that moment, Lee Se-hoon's hands started itching to work, so he carved white light again, something he had not done in a long time. Helena spoke from behind him. If you want to try, go ahead. If you've got the skill, pick anything from that pile. If he could make use of that level of custom whetstone, Helena had no reason to stop him. Then, Lee Se-hoon turned his gaze toward the weapons. In the end, he picked up an ordinary dagger. Helena looked surprised. You're choosing that? Lee Se-hoon nodded. The blade was perfectly aligned, and the central axis had no distortion at all. It felt like a knife meant for someone who truly understood swords. As for the whetstone, he chose the one with the most evenly compressed mana particles. If it belonged to the owner of this dagger, then even if Lee Se-hoon sharpened the edge to its limit, they should still be able to handle it properly. After that, Lee Se-hoon began sharpening the blade. Watching him, Helena could not help feeling shocked. Was this really a newly enrolled freshman? At the same time, Leah suddenly shouted from behind him. I finally finished. When she looked up, she saw Helena, but her grandmother's expression seemed a little off. Leah immediately guessed what had happened. You tried to mess with our junior, but ended up getting taught a lesson instead, didn't you? Helena smacked Leah on the head. Shut it. Don't disturb him while he's working. Another hour passed before Lee Se-hoon finally finished what he was doing. Looking at the blade, he said, This is the best I can do right now, but next time, I'll make it even better. The moment Helena heard that, she immediately kicked both of them out. Leah looked speechless. Why is she getting mad out of nowhere again? She's impossible. Let's just go. After the two of them left, Helena stared at the blade for a long time. Mostyn thought. Just then, another person walked in. It was a middle-aged man, but he called Helena his older sister. Helena told him to keep his voice down. The man had come to ask where the kitchen knives were. Then the two started arguing again. Helena snapped, When are you going to quit that restaurant job? You're the head professor of the swordsmanship department, and yet you're hiding away in a kitchen. The man could not be bothered to deal with his sister. But soon, he noticed the blade on the table. His expression froze, and he stood there in a daze, his eyes turning serious. Sis, did you sharpen this knife while drunk again? But Helena said she had done nothing. The man frowned even harder. Then was it those chef friends of yours? Did their technique improve that much? Helena then said something he could hardly believe. A freshman sharpened this blade. The man clearly did not believe her. Helena repeated herself. I have no reason to lie to you. He really is a freshman who just enrolled this year. At that moment, Lee Se-hoon became even more mysterious in their eyes. After Lee Se-hoon and Leah left the smithy, they wandered around campus. Lee Se-hoon learned that Leah's grandmother had once been a professor in the metallurgy department, and after retiring 5 years ago, she opened this hardware shop. Over the past 10 years, many professors had left the metallurgy department, and in the future, it would become the weakest department in Babel Tower. Leah did not want to talk about that. She only wanted to know how her enchantment had turned out. Lee Se-hoon said, Your fundamentals are solid. There's almost nothing to criticize. Although Leah kept feigning modesty, her expression had already betrayed her. But then, Lee Se-hoon pointed out her weakness. You clearly thought of a better method, yet you didn't use it. Not knowing something can be fixed by learning. But knowing it and still refusing to act is a problem. A creator's imagination is both a weapon and a talent. And right now, you're suppressing yours. Hearing that, Leah became angry. Do you think I don't know that? At that moment, Lee Se-hoon reached into his coat. He handed her a dagger. Because of my schedule, I don't have much time. So please focus. If someone tells you there is a stone beneath the surface of the water, then forging is creating that stone and placing it there. Magic, on the other hand, is carving the shadow of that submerged stone on the surface of the water. That is why magic has qualities similar to dreams. At that moment, crimson lotus-like flames appeared on Lee Se-hoon's blade. Then a white-gray mist began to swirl around it. Enhancement is not something you simply apply to the surface of a weapon. It has to reach deep inside. If one layer is not enough, then stack it in layers. Only then can you enchant a weapon to its absolute best. Then, Lee Se-hoon lightly swung the dagger and flicked it forward, pinning it into a nearby tree trunk. The instant the blade pierced the trunk, the white mist around it moved. A streak of white light shot upward and sliced the leaves above cleanly in half. This could not really be called proper enchantment, but Lee Se-hoon believed Leah should be able to understand it. Because true geniuses could carve out their own path, even when they were hesitating. Leah seemed to realize something important, and immediately asked if she could borrow the blade. She promised Lee Se-hoon that she would remake it even more perfectly, then return it to him. Lee Se-hoon did not mind letting her take the dagger. If she needed more, he had plenty. Leah burst into laughter. "Thank you. I seriously love you." Before Lee Se-hoon could even process whether he had just been confessed to, Leah had already vanished from his sight. A system notification appeared. A bond has been formed with Leah. Current rank, E. Lee Se-hoon chuckled. He had not expected to form a connection with her this easily. And today, Lee Se-hoon finally saw one of the three dogs. The young mad dog, and his duel against a demon god-level powerhouse. What left Lee Se-hoon speechless, however, was that Erica kept following him. Lee Se-hoon told her she should leave, because being followed like this made him uncomfortable. Erica said she could leave, but she would quietly watch him from a distance. Right then, Lee Se-hoon extracted ore from his bond with Erica. It was a high-grade ore called Association Contact Stone, with mid-low quality. After that, he also extracted ore from Leah Claudel. It was also high-grade, but its quality was the highest. At that moment, inside the arena for the Martial Hall's Glory Battle, two people were preparing to begin their ranked match. The host of this match was Lan Fong, the youngest professor in the martial arts department. The first to appear today was a top fourth-year student from the anicaps, an heir of the Imayer family, which was famous for consistently producing S-rank heroes. She had maintained an S-rank position in the martial arts hall for 3 consecutive years, constantly breaking records. She was a nearly perfect superhuman, an active A-rank hero, and the champion of the martial hall. Her name was Elia Miles, a sacred swordmaster who had conquered the hero tower. Lee Se-hoon did not react much to her entrance, since he was not particularly close to her. The person Lee Se-hoon was truly waiting for was about to appear. He was the inheritor of each country's intangible cultural heritage, the Firewheel Spear, the top third-year student of the Spear Arts Department, ranked 11th in the martial hall, and a fiercely burning rising star. Seeing him, Lee Se-hoon finally cracked a smile. At last, they met again. Mad Dog, his trusted partner from his previous life. Without Mad Dog, Lee Se-hoon would never have lasted until the end. Soon, Mad Dog and Elia clashed. Even though his opponent was a woman, the power she unleashed shocked even Mad Dog. Immediately, the spear in Mad Dog's hands began spinning non-stop. But Elia did not take him seriously at all. She simply swung her sword, and several flame attacks rapidly closed in on Mad Dog. Mad Dog reacted quickly as well, constantly whipping his spear around to block every attack. Yet Elia merely stood with one hand behind her back and swung her sword again, sending several more attacks flying at him. Even considering how young Mad Dog was right now, his performance was far below the standard. Had he not received the support he deserved as the inheritor of the Firewheel Spear? Many things confused Lee Se-hoon, but the biggest problem was still the weapon in Mad Dog's hands. At that moment, Mad Dog's gaze turned sharp. He was finally going all out. But in the next second, Elia's sword tip was already pressed against Mad Dog's throat. The overwhelming difference in strength made him clearly feel the insurmountable gap between them. Left with no choice, he could only admit defeat. Elia burst into laughter. "You're actually pretty strong. If you keep working hard, maybe one day you'll make me use 50% of my strength. Then I'll have no choice but to take you seriously." The arena erupted in cheers. As expected of Elia, "She's incredible." At that moment, the host had planned to interview both participants. Or rather, that was the original plan. Unfortunately, student Lian Xinghe has left early due to personal reasons. Elia could not hide the smile on her face. "Even for me, challenging the rank 9 fighter right after this would be tough, so I need to rest." Under Elia's dazzling spotlight, Mad Dog was completely eclipsed. Lee Se-hoon could also tell that this kid was clearly in a terrible mood, so he turned and left, Erica, who was behind him, looked surprised. "You're leaving before it's over?" Lee Se-hoon said he was not interested in that kind of fight. The blonde guy on stage was annoying, and just watching him made him irritated. Erica sensed Lee Se-hoon's anger, and understood one thing. At the very least, he had not come here to watch her brother. Just then, she suddenly heard a voice. What an interesting inner voice. The one speaking was Elia, and her eyes were fixed on the direction Lee Se-hoon had left. After the match ended, Lee Se-hoon found Mad Dog in a nearby parking lot. Lien Xinghe, who had survived all alone, really did look somewhat pitiful. Even with his terrible personality, he had been the core pillar of the Death Squad, and in the end, he became a hero who sacrificed himself to defeat the great Demon King Lu Hai. Lee Se-hoon had to obtain affinity from Mad Dog before he completely lost control. Mad Dog asked, "Did you watch my match just now? You actually managed to find me. You've got some skill." But right then, Mad Dog realized something was off. The person in front of him seemed to be the top student of Borsippa's department, so why was he here? Lee Se-hoon felt a little awkward, unsure why Mad Dog was reacting this way. So he simply said, "I want to talk to you for a bit." Mad Dog shouted, "Get lost, I don't want to talk to anyone right now." But no matter what Lee Se-hoon said, Mad Dog kept telling him to leave. Even when Lee Se-hoon said this conversation would benefit him, Mad Dog said coldly, "I hate weaklings, especially the kind who have accomplished nothing, yet think a bit of mediocre talent makes them worthy of standing beside me. So whatever you want to say, forget it. Go home. You're just a blacksmith." Hearing that, Lee Se-hoon fell silent. Thinking back to the Mad Dog he knew, this younger version was already practically a gentleman. After all, the things he used to say were much harsher than this. In the next moment, red mana spread over Lee Se-hoon's hand. It seemed there was no way to communicate with him through ordinary methods. Mad Dog's gaze turned hostile. "Looks like you don't plan to back down." Lee Se-hoon chuckled. "Then let me tell you something. The Firewheel Spear lineage will end because of you." Hearing those words, Mad Dog's expression froze completely. His figure flickered, leaving behind an afterimage where he stood. In the next instant, Mad Dog's real body was already in front of Lee Se-hoon. His eyes filled with cold, killing intent. He threw a punch at Lee Se-hoon without holding back. But Lee Se-hoon had already read the path of his attack clearly, so that punch could never hit him. With a sharp bang, their bodies clashed and separated instantly. Lee Se-hoon did not continue tangling with Mad Dog because he knew very well that he had not come here to fight. Yet that simple block alone shocked Mad Dog. "He actually blocked my mana-infused punch. Looks like being an honor student isn't just for show." At that moment, Mad Dog's view of Lee Se-hoon finally changed. Maybe this person really was worth talking to. In the air, the lingering embers of their mana trails still slowly drifted. In the next moment, Lee Se-hoon and Mad Dog clashed once again. With a thunderous boom, a massive burst of flame power sent Mad Dog flying backward. When the dust cleared, Lee Se-hoon stood there completely unharmed. Mad Dog was even more shocked. Those embers should have reacted only to his mana. So why had they appeared in Lee Se-hoon's hand? Had that attack been blocked, or had it been stolen? In the next second, Mad Dog launched another attack at Lee Se-hoon. Lee Se-hoon chuckled. It looked like this guy was genuinely angry now. Mad Dog unleashed his full pressure, and purple mana began radiating from his body. Perhaps the tragedy of the Firewheel Spear lineage had happened because of that very temper. Mad Dog clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles cracked. Bang, bang, bang. His fist slammed repeatedly into Lee Se-hoon's arms. The effect of Steel Seeker was nearly at its limit, and Lee Se-hoon's body was close to reaching its breaking point. As Mad Dog's fist was about to smash toward Lee Se-hoon's face again, Lee Se-hoon thought that if forming a peaceful bond was impossible, then he would just have to crush him first. But Mad Dog's punch was stopped by another hand. The one who appeared was the blonde brat, Elia's younger brother. Mad Dog knew him as well, and asked if he knew that the person in front of them was Borsippa's top student. Then Mad Dog slowly withdrew his hand. "Leave." Hearing that, the blonde brat immediately pushed Lee Se-hoon away. "We're leaving. Stop making him angry." Lee Se-hoon still wanted to tell Mad Dog to remember his words, but the blonde brat cut him off before he could finish. "Stop talking and move." After the two of them left, Mad Dog sank deep into self-reproach. In a moment of impulse, he had thrown a punch and nearly damaged his master's honor. Still, from that moment on, he began to take interest in the name Lee Se-hoon. After they left, the blonde brat kept pressing Lee Se-hoon, asking why he had provoked that senior. "If I hadn't stopped you, you would have been dead." Lee Se-hoon told him not to say something so stupid. I wouldn't have died, it was just a little dangerous. Just then, a system notification appeared. Connection established with target Liang Xinghe. Affinity extraction is now available. But the version Lee Se-hoon knew was Mad Dog Liang Xinghe. If this version was so mild, the effect of the extracted bondstone might change. He needed to find a way to raise Liang Xinghe's affinity rank. That aside, the blonde brat beside him seemed pretty useful. Lee Se-hoon just wondered if his hand was alright. The blonde brat laughed. I'm totally fine. My hands are tougher than the rest of my body. But his tone quickly turned serious. More importantly, do you know someone is already watching you? Then he asked Lee Se-hoon, back at the arena, did you say something about my sister? Lee Se-hoon's answer left the blonde brat frozen. Nothing much, I just said she was kind of a jerk. No wonder his sister had kept asking him questions. Then, the blonde brat said seriously, my sister is interested in you now. You're finished. Not even the gods can save you. Lee Se-hoon truly had not expected Elia's hearing to be that sharp. She had heard him badmouth her from that far away. The blonde brat sighed. My sister is an S-rank hero. You seriously underestimated an S-rank's senses. He warned Lee Se-hoon not to take his sister lightly. You might not know this, but my sister. Before he could finish, Lee Se-hoon cut in. Your sister is narrow-minded and likes scheming, right? That merely scared the life out of the blonde brat. The blonde brat jumped in shock and frantically checked his surroundings. Only after confirming his sister was not nearby, did he finally relax. He could not help asking, what exactly did my sister do to make you hate her that much? Sacred Sword Saint Elia Miles. Lee Se-hoon could not deny that she was extremely powerful. Back then, she had even obtained a sacred sword. But to Elia, that sword did not seem particularly special, so she simply abandoned it. Then one day, the sacred sword wielder suddenly disappeared without leaving a single word behind, and the one who appeared in her place was someone who used the remains of a demon god as a sword. That person was called the demon god of light extinction, and she looked exactly like the blonde brat's sister. Lee Se-hoon sighed. It's nothing. I just don't like that face. After saying that, he waved at the blonde brat and prepared to leave. But the blonde brat did not believe him. He was convinced that something had definitely happened between Lee Se-hoon and his sister. Then the blonde brat's phone suddenly received a text message. His sister wrote, looks like I've made an interesting friend. From now on, keep telling me things about him. In other words, from that moment on, the blonde brat had somehow become the middleman. Soon, his sister sent another message. From your scheming big sister, I'm asking you for a favor. The blonde brat froze completely. Had his sister heard their entire conversation just now? The next day quickly rolled around. Maybe Lee Se-hoon had pressed Mad Dog too hard yesterday. The blonde brat sitting in front of him looked back with an annoyed expression. In today's class, I'm definitely going to beat you. Just then, a very small old man entered in a wheelchair. His name was Doba. For the next 2 weeks, Doba would be teaching their major course, and the topic would be attribute forging. Everyone's expression turned grim. After all, this professor was famous for being crazy. Doba said, before class begins, I have something to hand out. These are the scores for the works you submitted in last week's major forging class, as well as your budgets for the first semester. When I call your name, come up one at a time. Lee Se-hoon was the last one called. Some people guessed that he might receive 3 times the normal budget. But to everyone's surprise, Lee Se-hoon received no budget at all. The professor explained, your work was completed to an outstanding level, so we have decided to display it at Wednesday's public auction, together with the works of second-year students. Your budget will be decided based on the final bid, so please wait until then. Lee Se-hoon pretty much understood. This was probably something Vice Dean Michael had arranged. Still, if there were any real problems, Professor Kim would have stopped it already. So he nodded to show that he understood. Then I'll wait a little longer. Today's class would focus on handling residual mana, and the professor said one student had volunteered to assist with the lesson. To Lee Se-hoon's surprise, the person who appeared was Mad Dog. That genuinely shocked him. It seemed Mad Dog had come here specifically to find him. The professor briefly introduced Mad Dog, then explained the concept before the practice began. When forging weapons, residual mana mainly appeared in 2 forms. The first was the basic charge type, and the second was the independent type, which could generate mana on its own or absorb mana from the air. Both had their advantages, but the independent type was much harder to create. That was because constructing a mana core had no fixed standard. It changed depending on the materials, techniques, and the creator's own mana. Then the professor looked at Mad Dog and had him demonstrate. You will all begin with the charge type. Gradually, red mana appeared around Mad Dog's hand. Fire element mana was extremely unstable, making the use of residual mana especially tricky. And the technique Mad Dog displayed now was a perfect example. Blooming Fire Wheel Spear. Controlling fire mana to this level left the students in disbelief. After all, most of them already struggled just to keep fire contained inside a furnace. The professor picked up the remote and began the lecture. Since we have such an excellent assistant, we should make proper use of him. Your assignment is due next Thursday. You may create freely, but please center your work around the theme written on the board. After that, the professor told everyone to head to the forging room together and reminded them not to forget to change clothes. Everyone saw this as a rare opportunity. After all, one of the school's star figures was right in front of them. Even the blonde brat from earlier could not wait to greet Mad Dog. To him, even saying a few words to the senior was an honor. But when the blonde brat approached Mad Dog simply said coldly, "Get lost, I hate weaklings." Left with no choice, the blonde brat obediently stepped back. And it was not just him. The excitement everyone had felt moments ago vanished in an instant. At that moment, Mad Dog fixed his gaze on Lee Se-hoon. Lee Se-hoon ignored him and walked straight toward the door, but Mad Dog called after him. "Lee Se-hoon, stop right there." Mad Dog asked, "Just how much do you know about me?" Lee Se-hoon didn't beat around the bush. "I heard your level is measured by how many wheels you can maintain. The current Sectmaster B-rank hero Lee Yuanlong reached 8 wheels. You maintained 3 just now with ease. So if you actually put in the effort, you could probably maintain 6 at once." Mad Dog followed after him, his voice low. "And so what? I still haven't gotten any stronger." Then, Lee Se-hoon said one sentence that made Mad Dog freeze completely. "You already reached the 7-wheel round before, didn't you? And then, one day, you suddenly couldn't control them anymore." Mad Dog had not even told his sect master about that. He could not understand how Lee Se-hoon knew. Lee Se-hoon continued, "I have some talent with fire, so when I watched the way your flames flowed, something felt off. You clearly have enough stored up, but you never let it fully erupt. The way you use it now feels like you're just throwing it around half-heartedly." Mad Dog immediately asked, "Do you know the reason? If you do, can you fix it?" Lee Se-hoon slowly replied, "I do have a theory." Those words instantly brightened Mad Dog's expression. He thought Lee Se-hoon might truly have a solution, but Lee Se-hoon's next words left him speechless. "I do have a way to solve it, but I have no reason to tell you for free." Mad Dog understood that without paying a price, he would never get the answer he wanted. So he said in a deep voice, "If you tell me, I'll grant you 3 requests." Lee Se-hoon raised the first condition. "For every piece of advice and every bit of help I give you, you must pay a matching price. Second, whenever you run into something you can't decide on, you have to come discuss it with me. I'll give you some time to decide. But if you don't answer before I reach the forging room, then don't bother answering at all." Mad Dog knew exactly what he wanted, so he accepted without the slightest hesitation. A faint smile appeared on Lee Se-hoon's face. As expected, he was still the Mad Dog from his previous life. He had not changed at all. After that, Lee Se-hoon arrived at the forging furnace and prepared to begin. Many people were confused. He's starting without even drawing a blueprint? Lee Se-hoon mixed fire attribute ore and dark attribute ore in a 7-to-3 ratio. Someone immediately judged him. If he throws them in like that, all the elemental mana will scatter. How could an honor student make such a basic mistake? Lee Se-hoon ignored the comments and kept heating the materials until elemental mana began spilling out of the ore. Then, he slowly removed the cloth bag from his hand. With a single gesture, fire-colored mana surged into the furnace. The professor was shocked. He's already using thermal displacement. No wonder Kim Min-chul accepted his entry into the public auction. To most people, this might look like ordinary thermal displacement. But to Mad Dog, the scene looked completely different. After observing carefully, Mad Dog's eyes slowly filled with disbelief. At that moment, Lee Se-hoon rhythmically pumped the bellows with his foot. He made the fire attribute mana spread outward from the inside, while the dark attribute mana seeped inward from the outside. In doing so, he balanced 2 opposing forces and formed a perfect ring. Mad Dog murmured inwardly, "I finally understand." That was the second attribute mana he had always been forbidden from using because it interfered with the Sun Wheel Forbidden Spear. But if Mad Dog used it this way, his wheel count would drop back to 5. Lee Se-hoon was a little surprised by that. Even so, 5 black flame wheels were stronger than 7 ordinary wheels. The Flame Fire sect regularly sent instructors to verify whether successors living outside still possessed the required skills, and if Mad Dog fell below 6 wheels, he would lose his status as successor. That made Lee Se-hoon feel a little uneasy, so he immediately said, "Then try it again using your original method." But Mad Dog shook his head and said he could not do it anymore because he could no longer control his dark attribute mana. Lee Se-hoon quickly asked when the instructor from the Flamefire sect would arrive. Mad Dog said the earliest would be tomorrow. In other words, this situation was already close to spiraling out of control. If Mad Dog lost his successor status, he would be expelled from the sect immediately. The only question now was whether there was a way to fix everything within a single day. Lee Se-hoon patted Mad Dog on the shoulder. If I can protect your position as successor, are you willing to pay any price? Mad Dog had no reason to refuse that. As long as Mad Dog agreed to that much, it was enough for Lee Se-hoon. In the next second, Lee Se-hoon extracted an ore from Mad Dog's body. It was an ultra high-quality ore. When fire attribute mana and dark attribute mana coexist, the two attributes create a special wavelength and resonate using internal mana. Lee Se-hoon burst into laughter. With this, we can solve the problem perfectly. First, let's modify your weapon. After that, Lee Se-hoon and Mad Dog went to Archicup's private training field. Only those ranked in the top 100 of the Martial Hall or the top 30 of the Academy were qualified to use it. It also had a very convenient feature. The wall colors and displayed scenery could be freely changed. Mad Dog changed the surroundings into the image of his home. Lee Se-hoon laughed. So you're actually homesick? In truth, this place had been given to Mad Dog by his master, so he occasionally used that function. After that, Lee Se-hoon stopped thinking about it and began making the training tool. With a light flick of his finger, the black stone cracked open instantly. Before long, Lee Se-hoon finished making the weapon. Mad Dog looked at the finished product in surprise. A single short spear was already awkward enough, and now you made me dual spears? Lee Se-hoon told him that from now on, he would use his left hand to create flame wheels, and his right hand to release dark attribute mana. Mad Dog took a deep breath. In the next moment, both of his hands began moving rapidly. But halfway through, his movement suddenly stopped, and even he did not know what had gone wrong. Lee Se-hoon saw through the issue immediately. The problem was simple. Mad Dog had unconsciously injected dark attribute mana into his left hand. It was normal for multiple types of attribute mana to mix during release, but in Mad Dog's case, that mixing caused severe interference. This was probably because he had spent all this time suppressing his dark attribute mana. As long as he got used to handling both attributes at once, reaching the sixth wheel again would actually be fairly easy for him. Lee Se-hoon then slipped his bracelet onto Mad Dog's wrist. Mad Dog looked surprised. Looks like you've got a lot of good equipment. 3 hours passed quickly, and Mad Dog's left and right hands adapted faster and faster. Lee Se-hoon felt genuinely pleased. The reason Mad Dog picked it up so quickly was simple. This training method had been designed by Mad Dog's future self. In that case, Lee Se-hoon wanted to see just how capable the past version of Mad Dog really was. At that moment, Mad Dog switched into breathing mode, doubling the intensity of his muscle movements. After the training ended, Mad Dog stared blankly at Lee Se-hoon. Because Lee Se-hoon was also staring straight at him, the reason Lee Se-hoon was watching was to collect data so he could make a weapon for him. Once that weapon was completed, it would become much easier for Mad Dog to use dual attribute mana. Still, Lee Se-hoon warned him in advance that this was only part of the assignment he had to submit, so Mad Dog should not expect too much. Mad Dog naturally did not expect a first-year student to make anything that amazing anyway. That said, Lee Se-hoon was curious. Why was Mad Dog so determined to keep his position as successor? Was there some special reason behind it? At that moment, Mad Dog lightly swung the weapon in his hand. As it turned out, his master had always wanted him to become the sect leader. As his disciple, Mad Dog believed his only duty was to follow that wish. Mad Dog had been an orphan with no family until he was taken in and raised by an S-rank hero, the first sect leader of the Flamefire sect. Although his master had retired after being injured and had lost his actual combat power, as both a master and a father, his influence over Mad Dog was absolute. Right now, the bond between Lee Se-hoon and Mad Dog was only at level 3. If it rose higher, he might be able to extract even better ore. But Mad Dog still could not understand why Lee Se-hoon was helping him. Lee Se-hoon thought carefully. He needed a convincing reason, or Mad Dog would definitely become suspicious. The 6 great demon realms were lands swallowed by the myriad demon swamp, crawling with tens of thousands of monsters. Lee Se-hoon planned to enter all of those demon realms. For that, he needed someone to protect him. And he also needed materials to make weapons for the people who would fight beside him. So, the next leader of the Flamefire sect needed both strength and wealth. That was why Lee Se-hoon was teaching Mad Dog properly. After all, the two of them had not known each other for long. Mad Dog could not seriously expect him to help for free. He should not be that naive. Mad Dog lifted the weapon in his hand. He was not a naive person. If Lee Se-hoon wanted payment for helping him, then Mad Dog had only one condition: help him become sect leader, and in return, he would accompany Lee Se-hoon into the 6 great demon realms. Lee Se-hoon stared straight into Mad Dog's eyes, and he couldn't help but feel a surge of familiarity. As expected, this guy had not changed at all. He really was the Mad Dog he knew. In his previous life, Mad Dog had said almost the same thing: forge weapons for me, and I will kill demon gods for you. Thinking about how his previous life and this life had overlapped in this moment, Lee Se-hoon almost laughed. Then, he took out the red bead. Are you sure you won't regret this? After confirming that Mad Dog had no regrets, Lee Se-hoon poured his mana into the bead. Even if you hate me right now, I'll make you the sect leader. A little over an hour passed. Then a 7-wheel instructor entered the training field. He was Jang Xianyun from the Fire Gate. Mad Dog asked coldly, "Who are they?" Zhang Xianyun answered, "They are disciples chosen by the main family. The family head sent them to watch our match and broaden their horizons." But before he could finish speaking, Mad Dog cut him off. "The next family head has not been decided yet. Watch your mouth." Jiang Xianyun did not care at all. "Then let us test your ability first." Mad Dog refused outright. "I'm training the 7th wheel. I don't have time." Jiang Xianyun froze slightly. A fool who only knew how to train actually dared to covet the position of sect leader. In that case, he could not let Mad Dog continue unchecked. No matter what happened, someone behind him would cover for him anyway. After that, Zhang Xianyun said a few more things, and Mad Dog eventually agreed. After all, the man was far too annoying. If Mad Dog refused, he would probably keep pestering him non-stop. The moment the match began, Mad Dog released a tremendous surge of power. Jiang Xianyun laughed loudly. A pair of short spears? How crude. Mad Dog had no interest in his nonsense. "If you're going to fight, then attack already." Jiang Xianyun snorted. "Have you forgotten the clan leader's orders? Your dark attribute mana must be suppressed. That filthy flame will never be acknowledged." Mad Dog did not bother arguing. "Once we exchange blows, the answer will be clear." In the next moment, Jiang Xianyun unleashed his own flame power. "Then let me show you just how wide the gap between us is." But the instant their flames collided, Jiang Xianyun realized something was wrong. Mad Dog's power was devouring his flame wheel. A moment later, the weapon in Jiang Xianyun's hand began vibrating with a low hum. Then, with a sharp crack, his blade snapped cleanly in two. Jiang Xianyun never imagined he would lose in a single move, much less lose this badly. Mad Dog coldly threw Jiang Xianyun's own words back at him. "Looks like your weapon is pretty crude too." After this match, once the promotion ceremony was held, Mad Dog would be officially recognized as an instructor and become the successor of the Fire Gate. But to truly become the sect leader, he still had to meet 2 conditions. First, he had to reach the 8-wheel realm. Second, he had to gain the approval of most instructors. Forget the 8-wheel realm for now. In Lee Se-hoon's eyes, even getting the instructor's approval would be difficult for Mad Dog. Mad Dog was not worried about that. He could earn their approval 1 spar at a time. However, future spars would not be as easy as today's, because they would no longer be battles fought inside his own specialty field. Hearing that, Lee Se-hoon became even more confident that he could push Mad Dog into the leader's seat. Of course, the price Mad Dog would have to pay later would not be small. Mad Dog asked directly what kind of price Lee Se-hoon wanted. Whether it was money or materials, as long as it was within his ability, he would provide it. Aside from that, he had one more request. Lee Se-hoon was a little surprised. He had not expected Mad Dog to make this request so early in this life. Then, Lee Se-hoon looked at Mad Dog's equipment. It was decent, but in the end, it was still only borrowed gear. Mad Dog could not help wondering, if Lee Se-hoon could create something of this level in just a few hours, what kind of spear would he make if he truly took it seriously? So Mad Dog said, "Make me a more useful weapon." A system notification appeared. Bond level with Mad Dog has risen to 2. As their affinity level increased, their relationship was officially established. Each time a transaction was formed with the target, a bond stone would be created. And as transactions with the target continued, the bond stone would mature faster. Meanwhile, many important figures had already gathered at the auction. The auction host spoke with exaggerated surprise. "Next, we will begin the regular auction for the Technical Academy's second-year works." Lee Se-hoon and Erica were seated below, among the audience. The first second-year auction item was a piece of clothing, made by refining the fur of an S-rank magical beast, the White Tiger. It was soft to the touch, yet as tough as steel, and it also had cutting properties. The host then gave a live demonstration. The moment his weapon struck the clothing, it snapped. Just as shown, items that increased cutting power by sacrificing durability could be easily exposed. The next item to appear was Apprentice Joseph's blue shell sword. Erica, sitting beside Lee Se-hoon, asked quietly, "Do you know why they're doing this?" Many people only knew that the divine white tiger beast had a tough body, but its actual ability was far more complicated. Its fur, flesh, and bones each had different properties. Its fur could mimic the sharpness of any metal item it touched, so no matter how good a weapon was, its durability would gradually be worn down. Erica could not help worrying. Doesn't that put the white light greatsword at a disadvantage? Swords that increase cutting power usually have lower durability. Lee Se-hoon nodded. Erica's judgment was correct. This was clearly a trap set for Professor Tim Min-chul and him. If the white light greatsword broke here, the professor who endorsed it would also lose face. As the auction items in front were sold, one after another, it was soon time for Lee Se-hoon's work to appear. The host announced loudly, "Next, the freshman representative of Borsippa Academy will verify the quality of the white light greatsword." With a sharp whoosh, the sword struck straight against the white tiger pelt. The instant the blade touched the pelt, the white light greatsword began vibrating violently. But, in the end, the sword did not break. Instead, it was sent flying out of the freshman representative's hand. The professors at the scene were completely stunned. What had just happened? Why had the sword stayed perfectly intact instead of breaking? At that moment, Lee Se-hoon slowly stood up. He needed to personally step onto the stage and explain the true mechanics of this weapon. Normally, a sword built around a slaughter blade should have snapped when clashing against stone brocade. But the white light greatsword gathered mana scattered in the surrounding air and crystallized it along the edge, forming a blade film as thin as paper, almost like a second wind blade layered over the original edge. The density of that mana was not high enough to be called sword aura, but its sharpness far surpassed ordinary light. That was why it was described as a slaughter blade. Only then did Erica understand that what had happened earlier was also because of the slaughter blade. Exactly. When two identical slaughter blades met, they did not cancel each other out. Instead, they resonated. And with that slaughter blade, Lee Se-hoon could do something even more interesting. He used the harmony stone he had obtained from Inoue Erica to correct the disorder inside the sword's internal mana array. Once the harmony stone activated, the mana that had been drifting aimlessly began to return to a proper flow. All Lee Se-hoon needed to do now was add one clear path, and the sword's grade could rise. With a flash of white light, the white light greatsword's grade rose to rare on the spot. The system evaluation appeared: white light greatsword, D rank, rare quality, D grade. It was a longsword infused with a pure white sand blade, granting it a simple skill that amplified the sand blade while raising its grade from high to rare. Lee Se-hoon then told the host beside him to reflect this in the starting price. As a result, the starting bid for the white light greatsword was raised from 1 million won to 5 million won. Even at that price, many people grew tense because it was still clearly undervaluing the sword. A bidding war was almost guaranteed. Soon, someone called out a bid of 30 million, and then paddle number 228 shot up, raising the price straight to 100 million won. At that point, the blonde brat could no longer hold back and directly bid 200 million. Erica, sitting beside Lee Se-hoon, also placed a high bid without hesitation, 230 million. Seeing this, the host's voice spiked with excitement. It had been a long time since so many people had become this heated over a single auction item. Lee Se-hoon himself was completely stunned. He only had a little over 100,000 won in his account, yet to these super rich people, this kind of money was apparently just pocket change. In the next moment, a voice cut through the crowd. Someone bid 600 million won. Everyone turned in surprise. The blonde brat's heart instantly sank. His yandere sister had ordered him to bring Lee Se-hoon's weapon back at any cost, but how was he supposed to compete with 600 million won? Now that a whale had entered the stage, all the little shrimp had no choice but to step back. And those little shrimp included both Erica and the blonde brat. They were unwilling to give up, but neither of them had enough money to keep fighting for the item. In the end, the white light greatsword was sold for 600 million won. Professor Kim burst into laughter. Even he had not expected the price to go that high. Lee Se-hoon was absolutely thrilled. With that much money, it felt like he would never run out for the rest of his life. 10 minutes later, he checked his balance and found that all 600 million won had been deposited. Because of Professor Yu's status, the auction venue had not charged Lee Se-hoon any commission. That alone saved him at least 300 million won. Still, Lee Se-hoon could not understand what Professor Yu wanted the sword for. As it turned out, Professor Yu intended to test it in a danger zone. A weapon this good would be wasted if it was only used for training. Lee Se-hoon also wanted to see how the White Light Greatsword performed in real combat. If Professor Yu had not chosen a destination yet, Silver Moon Mountain would be a good option, since it was one of the candidate sites for the first-year practical demon-slaying exercise. Professor Yu looked troubled for a moment, so Lee Se-hoon offered to forge a weapon that truly matched what she wanted. With that offer on the table, her hesitation immediately stopped mattering. Professor Yu settled the date for the Danger Zone trip right away. Lee Se-hoon laughed inwardly. As expected, this move worked best. Her so-called hesitation had probably just been an excuse. Jurgen Kruger, chairman of the world's top United Corporation, the UD Group, and currently the strongest summoner alive, had been ambushed during the War of 10,000 Demons and lost several divine artifacts. One of them was hidden somewhere in the Silver Moon Mountains. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the blonde brat went to see his older sister. His yandere sister smiled at him. So in the end, you still failed to bring that weapon back, didn't you? No matter how many times the blonde brat apologized, his sister did not bother responding. Since things had already turned out this way, they needed to think about what to do next. Soon, she thought of something. Since they would be taking classes together, she wanted the blonde brat to properly greet Lee Se-hoon on her behalf. If he handled this well, she would bring up the succession ceremony with their father again. At this rate, the blonde brat would soon lose even his #1 position, and she knew that better than anyone. With such a tempting reward in front of him, the blonde brat had no choice but to accept. I'll definitely bring back a sword from Lee Se-hoon. His sister nodded in satisfaction. Remember, no matter what it takes, bring one back. She recalled what Lee Se-hoon had said at the arena that day. For some reason, that woman rubbed him the wrong way, especially her face. On the other side, Lee Se-hoon had forged a pair of dual spears for his good brother, Mad Dog. Even the professor praised the finished product repeatedly. After all, the spears contained both internal flame wheels and auxiliary magic arrays. More importantly, if the user's control deviated even slightly, the weapon would warn them by repelling the attribute mana. At this level, the dual spears could serve as both training weapons and a textbook. So the professor gave Lee Se-hoon a perfect score and announced that from now on, he no longer needed to attend this class. The students in the class burst into laughter. At this point, just let him graduate already. Lee Se-hoon bowed to the professor, then prepared to leave. He checked the time. It was about time for Professor Ma's class. But when Lee Se-hoon arrived, he found that the blonde brat was already there and had even arrived earlier than him. Just as Lee Se-hoon was about to leave, the blonde brat called out to him. He said he wanted to ask Lee Se-hoon for a small favor. But Lee Se-hoon did not even let him finish. He refused immediately, without wanting to hear the question at all. The reason he rejected him so quickly was simple. He already knew the blonde brat's goal. It had to be about that yandere sister wanting his weapon again. If that was the case, the blonde brat might as well give up now. Just like with Yu Eun-ha, Lee Se-hoon could not let Elia lose interest in him. With her technical standards, anything he casually made would only disappoint her in the end. The blonde brat quickly told him not to rush, and pulled something out of his bag. The item was called the Black Flame Hammer, Hero Grade, a war hammer forged from dragon crystal. One side carried fire attribute mana, while the other carried dark spirit attribute mana, allowing it to amplify dual attribute power. The hammer was genuinely good, and it clearly had enormous room for improvement. The blonde brat asked Lee Se-hoon to spar with him again. This time, he would use the Black Flame Hammer as the wager. If Lee Se-hoon lost, he would have to forge a weapon for his yandere sister. Lee Se-hoon simply couldn't refuse such a wager. But he had to add one condition of his own. If Lee Se-hoon won, the blonde brat could not mention his sister for 1 month, and he had to tell her that result exactly as it was. Once the terms were set, the two of them prepared for the match. The blonde brat had put a lot on the line this time, so he had to win no matter what. In the next moment, he unleashed his full pressure, and blue mana surged from his body. Lee Se-hoon immediately saw that the blonde brat had compressed his mana into his fists. No wonder he had dared to interfere with Mad Dog earlier. Back then, he must have been confident he could stop Mad Dog's full force strike, but this was perfect. Lee Se-hoon also wanted to test just how powerful the spear he had just made really was. A system notification sounded. Body mana has been adjusted to optimal condition. Lee Se-hoon lightly swung the spear, and a sharp sonic boom ripped through the air. In the next moment, Lee Se-hoon and Jack collided head-on. Almost instantly, Jack's fist was already right in front of Lee Se-hoon's face. In Jack's mind, this strike was as good as landed. Victory was already in his hands. But in the very next second, a spark of flame flared to life. Lee Se-hoon swept his spear across, and blocked the punch head-on, forcing Jack to stumble backward instead. Jack was stunned. This was the first time he had seen a blacksmith fight with this much strength. The move Lee Se-hoon was using came from techniques he had learned in his previous life. He could not use them perfectly yet, but he could imitate the general form. Before his regression, Lee Se-hoon had heard countless stories from his past comrades. At first, he only approached them to raise their bond levels. But as they slowly opened up to him, he truly learned many combat techniques from them. Techniques they had never taught anyone else. During that time, they constantly called him talentless, and he endured plenty of criticism and insults. But because of that, he gained the chance to keep learning from them. Their figures kept shifting across the ground. Before long, Lee Se-hoon gained the advantage, pressing Jack back again and again. Jack's composure began to crack. Ever since Lee Se-hoon disrupted his rhythm, he had been dragged along by the flow of the fight. Still, Jack soon made a judgment. Lee Se-hoon's current stamina was probably being supported by a skill. If he could stall until that skill faded, he would still have a chance to turn things around. With that thought, Jack began retreating again and again. Lee Se-hoon praised him inwardly. As expected of a top student, his battle instincts were sharp. After all, even Lee Se-hoon had not expected to use the mana stored inside the ink bamboo bracelet. But now, he wanted to see how Jack planned to stop what came next. When Jack saw it, shock flashed through his eyes. He had clearly heard that Lee Se-hoon used fire attribute mana, but what he was doing now was practically suicide. In the next instant, Lee Se-hoon's flames surged straight toward him. Jack cursed under his breath. Damn it. Then, he slammed his palms together. When he spread his hands apart, a blade of sword energy appeared in his palm. With a simple swipe, he cut through Lee Se-hoon's flames. Seeing that, Lee Se-hoon was genuinely surprised. This guy was good. He had actually severed his flames barehanded. Lee Se-hoon had originally planned to hold back a little, but now, there was no need. So he unleashed the first ultimate technique of the flame spear, Eclipse Star Moon. In the next instant, the two streams of mana crashed into each other. The battle ended right there. Jack's fist was only an inch away from Lee Se-hoon's face, but Lee Se-hoon's spear was already pressed firmly against Jack's neck. Jack slowly lowered his fist. He admitted defeat, and he accepted it completely. A system notification sounded. Connection established with target Jack Miles. Jack directly admitted that he had lost, but Lee Se-hoon felt the match was closer to a draw. To Jack, however, failing to win after unleashing his strongest skill was as good as defeat. If he had been able to use that power to its fullest, the result might have been different. Lee Se-hoon asked, "Can he not use swords?" Jack himself was not completely sure. Every time he held a sword, it broke far too easily. He had even broken a sword with hero-grade durability before. Lee Se-hoon found that interesting. "Let me see your right hand." He told Jack to relax the strength in his hand and keep his mana still, or he might get hurt. Just as Jack was wondering what Lee Se-hoon was up to, Lee Se-hoon brought a hammer down. With a loud bang, the hammer struck Jack's hand without warning. That one strike let Lee Se-hoon understand the cause. Jack was not reinforcing weapons. He was unconsciously transforming the material itself. Jack was startled badly. "At least explain before you do something like that." But Lee Se-hoon's next words froze him on the spot. "Do you want me to make you a sword?" A system notification appeared. Contract extracted from target Jack Miles. Current contract level 1. From Jack's bond, Lee Se-hoon extracted compression stone, a top-grade material. It was a stone that compressed endlessly, able to compress all absorbed mana. Once the density exceeded its durability threshold, it would shatter. Lee Se-hoon told Jack not to worry. He would make him a proper longsword, one that would not break so easily. But just then, a figure appeared at the door. Professor Ma Guangju had unexpectedly walked in. The instant he entered, Lee Se-hoon received a system notification. Connection established with target Ma Guangju. Professor Ma Guangju's gaze was razor sharp. "Come here, I need to talk to you." "Jack? Wait outside." And just like that, Jack was shut outside the door. Ma Guangju stared at Lee Se-hoon and slowly said, "Last time, you carried yourself like a seasoned blacksmith. This time, you moved like an experienced spearmaster." Then he asked directly, "Who exactly are you? Answer carefully, so I don't misunderstand something." Lee Se-hoon immediately understood what Ma Guangju meant. Had his posture been so perfect that it looked suspicious? Then he took out a bond stone and explained, "It's nothing special. It's just a little trick I've been using. Basically, I adjust my muscles to temporarily imitate another person's body movements. Once the effect ends, it disappears naturally, just like this." Seeing that, Ma Guangju was clearly shocked. Does that skill have any limits? Lee Se-hoon answered. First, observing the target takes time, and since I'm forcing the technique onto my own body, the burden is pretty heavy. Ma Guangju murmured under his breath. Observation, imitation. Then he apologized to Lee Se-hoon. Sorry, my tone was too harsh earlier. There was once a demon soldier with a similar ability, so I overreacted. Lee Se-hoon knew who he was talking about. Ma Guangju was most likely thinking of the doppelganger demon, one of the 10 great villains from the War of 10,000 Demons. That vile creature loved copying heroes' martial arts, then using those very techniques to kill them. Because of it, countless secret hero techniques were lost forever. And between Ma Guangju and the doppelganger demon, there was clearly a deeply traumatic past. That was probably why a bond had formed between Lee Se-hoon and Ma Guangju. Either Ma Guangju suspected Lee Se-hoon had some connection to that monster, or he believed Lee Se-hoon might be useful in tracking it down. Either way, he had decided Lee Se-hoon had value. Lee Se-hoon said, "If demon soldiers are involved, then it can't be helped." If I were in your place, I probably would have reacted the same way. Hearing that Lee Se-hoon understood, Ma Guangju looked noticeably relieved, even pleased. These days, so-called heroes were becoming far too careless about demon soldiers. Ma Guangju continued, "After seeing your technique, I have no choice but to completely rethink my teaching methods. Once things are settled, I'll explain everything in detail." In Ma Guangju's eyes, if Lee Se-hoon put in even a little effort, he might be able to aim for the very top. The only problem was that his family background was far too ordinary, or perhaps his situation was more complicated than it appeared. Still, no matter how he looked at it, Lee Se-hoon was absolutely someone worth training. After leaving the room, Lee Se-hoon soon received a phone call. On the other end was his good brother, who immediately asked whether Lee Se-hoon had decided what reward he wanted. Lee Se-hoon was in no hurry, but the person on the other end clearly felt uneasy and wanted to know the payment first. So Lee Se-hoon asked, "Do you know a mage from Babel Tower named Louis Valente?" His good brother said he had never heard of the name and asked if it was someone Lee Se-hoon knew. Lee Se-hoon said that had nothing to do with him. All he needed to do was quietly find out Louis Valente's location and movements. Lee Se-hoon immediately provoked him. "What's wrong? Can't you dig up that information?" The person on the other end snapped back. "Don't look down on me." Still, when he thought about it, Lee Se-hoon had a point. Louis was basically a nobody in the Flameflower Alliance. His good brother told him to just trust him, because he had a way. The person Lee Se-hoon was looking for was the mad bomber, Louis Valente. Unlike his good brother, her past was not famous. The real problem was that she was a ticking time bomb. Still, people said she only became truly troublesome after getting injured. If Lee Se-hoon did not miss the timing this time, there might still be hope. Only 2 minutes later, his good brother called again. "I found her." Lee Se-hoon was genuinely shocked. Was his efficiency always this insane? Louis Valente, second-year runner-up in the Elemental Research Department, had once been a student with a very bright future. But half a year ago, during a sparring match in the Martial Hall, her myriad core explosion damaged her mana vein circuits permanently. She was currently on leave from school. Hearing that, Lee Se-hoon stayed silent for a long while. Right now, Louis was undergoing rehabilitation at a general hospital in Wall, but there had been no clear improvement. His good brother said he would send the detailed file shortly. A moment later, the blonde brat walked over. "So you're still here." He had come back to continue talking about his sword, but Lee Se-hoon had no time for that right now. Lee Se-hoon showed him his phone. "Getz Kruger and Pierre Barmut. Do you know these two?" The blonde brat actually did. The Kruger and Barmut families were connected by marriage, and both men were members of the Noble Exchange Society. So Lee Se-hoon asked him for a favor. He needed the blonde brat to investigate those two. As payment, Lee Se-hoon would forge him a sword. It would take about a week. The blonde brat was overjoyed. "If you can really do that, I'll do anything." Lee Se-hoon's next words left him completely stunned. "Then first, please break your arm for me. Make it quick. Otherwise, it's going to hurt." After settling things with the blonde brat, Lee Se-hoon arrived at the general hospital. Inside one of the hospital rooms, several doctors were observing the person in front of them. After several rounds of testing, Louis prepared to use her ability again. In the next moment, several fireballs shot violently from her palm. But at the same time, a sharp pain stabbed through her neck. A wave of nausea surged up, making her feel like she was about to vomit. It was a mana reflex reaction. The doctors immediately began mana freezing treatment. The lead doctor rubbed his temples in frustration and ordered, "Stop the experiment. Inject the mana neutralizer and sedative immediately." Louis insisted that she was fine and that she only needed a short rest before continuing the experiment. But the doctor with glasses decided that today's session was over. For the time being, they would also limit her rehabilitation experiments to 50 attempts per day. On top of that, they would lower the spells she used to beginner level. That shocked Louis. She absolutely did not want to be dropped to beginner level, so she begged them to give her one more chance. But the researchers ignored her shouting completely. Left with no choice, Louis violently tore off her physical restraints and lunged straight toward the researchers. The researchers did not panic at all. They fired 2 tranquilizer darts, and Louis's body froze instantly. When she woke up again, 2.5 hours had already passed. Louis slowly opened her eyes and cursed herself inwardly. She really was an idiot. She had been far too impatient. She had thrown a tantrum like a fool and wasted another chance for nothing. But instead of blaming herself, she needed to find another way. If rehabilitation experiments were not working, she would have to try something else, whether physical training or meditation. And right then, she suddenly bumped into someone. Pain shot through her nose and anger flared up immediately. Which bastard walked around without looking where they were going? Standing in front of her, Lee Se-hoon stared back with icy eyes and said coldly, "What are you looking at?" In Lee Se-hoon's previous life, his city had once suffered a devastating attack. Back then, he had been running through the ruins with everything he had, desperately searching for a way to survive. That explosion had nearly swallowed him whole. Just when Lee Se-hoon thought he was finally about to escape safely, a figure appeared in the sky above. That figure was Louis from his previous life, and she was the mastermind behind that explosion. She walked down through the air as if she were taking a casual stroll. Lee Se-hoon had been chilled to the bone because she was at least a hunter-class monster. One direct encounter would have been enough for her to kill him. Louis seemed to ignore him completely, brushing past him as though he did not matter, but she still bumped into him on the way. Then she turned her head and stared at him with cold eyes. "What are you looking at?" Back in the present, Louis was still a little dazed while Lee Se-hoon asked coldly, "What are you looking at?" Those words instantly set Louis off. He was the one who had bumped into her. So why was he acting so righteous? But in the next second, she froze, because Lee Se-hoon suddenly pulled her into his arms. Lee Se-hoon said, "You're sick right now, aren't you? Then stop wandering around and go back to your bed." Louis felt extremely conflicted. If she was discovered, she would not be able to do anything and would only be locked back inside her room. If her body had been fine, she could have dropped someone like Lee Se-hoon in 1 second. In the end, Louis had no choice but to follow Lee Se-hoon back to her hospital room. Lee Se-hoon asked what she needed. Louis said there was a box in the top drawer and told him to bring it over. Lee Se-hoon obediently handed her the box. "Once you feel better, I'll leave on my own. You won't have to kick me out." Louis found him strange. They had only met today, so why was he so eager to meddle in her business? Then she took something out of the box and inhaled the gas inside. After breathing it in, her expression relaxed noticeably. But Lee Se-hoon froze. "What are you doing? I told you to get treated, not to keep hurting yourself." Louis looked utterly confused. "What nonsense are you talking about? Why would I hurt myself?" Lee Se-hoon said bluntly, "What you just inhaled will make your throat worse. Did you really not know? Have you never felt anything strange?" Louis froze completely. She had never imagined that the thing she inhaled every day was actually poisonous. The treatment spray she used every day was actually poison. If she kept using it long term, it would rot her throat. Louis still seemed unwilling to believe it and demanded that Lee Se-hoon explain clearly. But Lee Se-hoon's meaning was exactly what he had said. Nothing more, nothing less. Just then, the hospital PA system called for Lee Se-hoon to return to the second floor nurse station. Lee Se-hoon looked at her. "I have to go. Whether you believe me or not is up to you." Hearing the name in the announcement, Louis finally realized that the person in front of her was Lee Se-hoon. And Lee Se-hoon had already said everything he needed to say. If you don't want to become a mana cripple, stop using that. Louis's temper was still fiery, and she snapped at him to get lost. "I have nothing to say to a blacksmith like you." Since she refused to listen, Lee Se-hoon did not bother pushing further, and simply left. By nightfall, Lee Se-hoon could tell that Louis seemed to deeply hate blacksmiths. Even so, affinity had formed between him and Louis. That surprised Lee Se-hoon. He had not expected a connection to form this quickly, just because he told her the treatment spray was poison. Lee Se-hoon's bone had been broken cleanly, so it would naturally heal in about a week. He would be discharged before long. Still, the doctor wanted him to rest for about 1 more week, just to be safe. That meant he could stay in Ascus for up to 2 weeks. During that time, Lee Se-hoon had to get closer to Louis and find a way to repair her mana circuit. More importantly, he had to deal with the mana corruptor. Lee Se-hoon asked the professor whether he knew Louis. The professor said Louis was one of the students he was currently treating. Lee Se-hoon explained that earlier in the hallway, he had seen her try to use magic, only to suddenly clutch her throat and suffer something like a seizure. Louis had told him not to tell anyone, but Lee Se-hoon believed it could be dangerous, so he decided to report it honestly. The moment Lee Se-hoon revealed that secret, the professor began typing rapidly on his keyboard. After a short while, he said only one thing. "I understand. You may leave now." The next morning, soon arrived. Lee Se-hoon contacted the blonde brat and asked whether he had found the information he had requested. The blonde brat said he had dug deep into that area, and there was definitely something suspicious there. First, Lee Se-hoon should know about the Ivory Tower Foundation under Babel Corporation. It was a foundation created for mages, independently operated with support from magic professors, graduates of the Ivory Tower, and related organizations. Though supported by those groups, it was managed separately from Babel Tower itself. Because of that, the Ivory Tower's influence over the Magic Academy was immense. Every year, the Ivory Tower selected outstanding scholarship students from each grade. Back then, gets from the upper years had been aiming for the second-year slot, but the person everyone considered impossible to surpass was none other than Louis, the person Lee Se-hoon had mentioned. Then, right before the scholarship selection, a weapon provided to Senior Louis by the Barmut family exploded in an accident. In the end, Senior Getz was chosen instead. That meant the Barmut family and Senior Getz's family were very likely working together. In other words, Getz and Barmut had clearly conspired against Louis. But then what was going on with that inhaler? There was one more strange detail. Louis was severely malnourished, yet Professor Charles from the Elemental State Department had apparently gone out of his way to help her. Even now, he was still personally supporting her rehabilitation. On the surface, it sounded like a touching story of a mentor caring for a student. But Lee Se-hoon could not shake the feeling that something was off. He thanked the blonde brat. For now, this information was enough. The blonde brat added one last thing. Also, quite a few people are worried about you, especially Wian Xinghei. Erica too? If you have time, at least tell them you're okay. Hearing that, Lee Se-hoon could almost feel several sharp gazes boring into him. After that, he sent them a quick message to let them know he was fine. That said, he did not seem to have Erica's phone number. Mad Dog was one thing, but Erica probably would not cause too much trouble. He would talk to her later. Then, Lee Se-hoon arrived outside Louis's hospital room and said, "I'm the person who helped you yesterday." The moment he finished speaking, a hand yanked him inside. Louis grabbed him and pinned him down. Her eyes were blazing with anger, as if she was about to explode. Then she shouted, "You bastard." Her voice was so loud it could probably be heard outside the building. "Do you have any idea what I went through because of you?" As it turned out, the doctors had spoken to Louis afterward. They told her that the intensity of her rehabilitation experiments was far too high for her current condition, so she needed 2 full weeks of absolute rest. After that, the experiment intensity would be lowered to level 1 and raised gradually. Louis had been pushing through rehabilitation training for the past 6 months, and because Lee Se-hoon had meddled, all that effort now felt wasted. Lee Se-hoon ignored her anger and only wanted to talk about the inhaler from yesterday. Louis coldly said she had not used it again. If he had heard those words, would he still keep using it? Then, Lee Se-hoon offered to treat the wound on her throat caused by the mana crystal. Louis looked at him as if he knew nothing. Do you even understand what a wound caused by a mana crystal means? It's an incurable condition that even climbers can't deal with. At least, that's what it has been until now. Louis coldly told Lee Se-hoon to keep talking. She wanted to hear what kind of grand speech this blacksmith planned to make. Lee Se-hoon was in no rush. He simply picked up an inhaler from her drawer. The first thing he wanted to know was where the inhaler had come from. Louis said a professor she knew had given it to her. Lee Se-hoon did not know its official name, but in his view, the best name for it was mana corrosive. The word corrosive made Louis' expression stiffen. Lee Se-hoon knew explaining it with words would take too long, so he decided to show her directly. In the next moment, he activated soul refinement magic. Lee Se-hoon told Louis to imagine her mana circuit as a power line that originally ran at 100 volts. But if the corroded section around her neck was suddenly replaced with a 200-volt circuit, the entire flow would clash and eventually overload. Once that happened, she would completely lose the ability to use mana. Hearing that, Louis could not help remembering what the professor had once told her. Back then, the professor had handed her the inhaler and told her it would help with her injury. Louis had even thanked the professor sincerely at the time. The professor had patted her shoulder and said, "Louis, if it's you, Even an injury caused by a mana crystal can be overcome. So no matter how much pain you suffer, you must not give up. Louis had nodded then and promised she would remember it. But looking back now, had that professor been deceiving her from the very beginning? At this point, Louis fully believed Lee Se-hoon. She clenched her teeth and swore that she would make that professor pay in blood. Then, Louis asked Lee Se-hoon to help her and promised that she would repay him. Lee Se-hoon made one thing clear first. He was only a blacksmith. He could not directly repair a damaged mana circuit itself, but he could adjust the way she used mana so she could cast magic again. Louis immediately asked what kind of payment he wanted. Lee Se-hoon said it was nothing too complicated. In the future, as long as Louis had the guts to explore the 6 great demon realms with him, he would help her with her current problem. Now, it was Louis' turn to think it over. After a moment, she sighed. There was not much to hesitate over. And so, the deal was set. In the future, Louis would accompany Lee Se-hoon into the 6 great demon realms, while Lee Se-hoon would help her use mana again. Once the agreement was made, Lee Se-hoon handed her a bag. These are today's training tools. Louis opened it and looked confused. Lee Se-hoon did not explain too much right away. First, he made her understand her condition. The circuit in her throat was damaged, so they needed to identify what kind of mana flow triggered the pain. Louis answered that it happened when refining mana. Lee Se-hoon nodded. Exactly. Ordinary mana circulating inside her body was not a problem, which was why she did not feel pain all the time. But to use magic, refined mana had to circulate through her body, and that was what truly triggered the pain. In that case, what Louis needed to do now was focus refined mana on her tongue first. Louis was shocked. You're telling me to operate mana in my extremities, where there are barely any circuits? She thought it sounded impossible, but Lee Se-hoon believed she could do it. Because before his regression, Louis had made a name for herself using this very method. Although Louis was still doubtful, she decided to hear Lee Se-hoon out first. Lee Se-hoon demonstrated for her. The first step was training the mana circuits inside the mouth. He shaped cherry juice into a square and showed it to Louis. This is the basic form. The key was to gently control the mana flow with the tongue and bind it steadily into a specific shape. Of course, there was another method, moving mana inside the mouth to help shape it, but that was too difficult at first. So using the teeth as support would be more stable. Louis thought Lee Se-hoon was completely insane. Still, during the training that followed, she shouted with everything she had, forcing both mana and emotion into her voice. The doctor watching them only thought another lunatic had arrived. Great. Now 2 lunatics had found each other. At that moment, Louis was biting down on a chopstick while practicing tongue twisters. 1 week later, Louis finally succeeded. She was incredibly proud of herself. Something like this could not possibly defeat her. Perhaps because this training method had originally been created by her future self, she adapted to it remarkably fast. But Louis soon grew irritated again. So far, only her voice and pronunciation had improved. What did any of this have to do with mana? Still, she quickly adjusted her mindset. Sorry, I just felt like this was kind of pointless for a second. So what do we train next? The next training was for refining the mana of flame spirit magic, also known as word magic. Lee Se-hoon told her to watch carefully, because he would only demonstrate once. To cast word magic, you need 2 things. The minimum mana required to form the core of the spell, and a powerful will to manifest it as magic. In simpler terms, it comes down to mental imagery. The clearer the shape of the magic in your mind, the more exponentially word magic grows in power. Lee Se-hoon said one word, sphere. In front of him, a sphere appeared. From here, reshape it into a form easier to fire, then inject the attribute. As the words left his mouth, the sphere changed as well. Louis was completely stunned by what she saw. Then, Lee Se-hoon said, accelerate, infuse. This was to increase penetration and speed. In the next instant, the ball of light transformed and shot forward. Lee Se-hoon had only stood there and spoken a few words. Yet, he shattered the window. But the mana did not disperse. It kept surging forward. So, Lee Se-hoon added, scatter. The mana burst apart, like fireworks. Only then did Louis realize her window had been destroyed. Lee Se-hoon quickly apologized and said he would pay for the window. But after waiting for a while, Louis still said nothing. Lee Se-hoon thought she might be angry. Then, with a single word, sphere, Louis actually formed a magic sphere in front of herself. Lee Se-hoon could not help admiring her inwardly, as expected of someone who had survived with him until the end in his previous life. She had learned it after seeing it just once. She really was a genius. Then Louis rebuilt the sphere and made it scatter. Magic itself ignored the laws of the world, and word magic, formed from words born of intense imagery, could go even further and ignore the laws of magic. In short, Word magic stood above ordinary magic. Once Louis recovered, the first thing she wanted was revenge. The people who had tormented her in the past would be torn apart, every last one of them. Lee Se-hoon decided it was time to move Louis to the next step. Louis looked puzzled. What is the next step? The next step Lee Se-hoon meant was overcoming Louis' trauma. Meanwhile, elsewhere, this year's freshmen were training in the arena. In front of them stood a very powerful skeleton. The upperclassmen, watching from above, were displeased. This year's freshmen did not seem to have a single decent fighter. In the next second, one of their phones rang. After answering, he received some news. That afternoon, a challenge notice had been posted on the bulletin board at Taro Cafe. Louis had requested a duel with student Getz Kruger. The duel was set for 1 p.m. 1 week later at the Martial Arts Hall. The notice also read, "If you fear injury and cannot attend, I will humbly accept your decision." In other words, if he was afraid of dying, he should stay put. The challenge letter enraged Getz completely. What infuriated him was that these insects dared to provoke him. He did not know how Louis had recovered, but this time, he would beat her to death. The scene returned to the hospital. Louis thought Lee Se-hoon might actually be insane. This was not something that could be solved just by sending out a death threat. Her spells could not even be considered beginner-level magic yet. Did he really think this made sense? She even began suspecting that Lee Se-hoon might be a spy sent by Pierre. For incantation magic, the caster's will mattered more than precise calculation. Because it was instinctive magic, the subconscious had an enormous influence. But because of that incident, Louis had become afraid of using magic. That was why this duel was absolutely necessary. Even if it was difficult, she had to trust Lee Se-hoon and use it to overcome her trauma. Louis worried that if she lost, her trauma might become even worse. Lee Se-hoon told her to stop talking nonsense. How could you possibly lose to a cowardly bastard like that? Besides, he had prepared special materials for Louis and would make her a weapon. This truly stunned Louis. In that case, she decided to trust him. Then what do I need to do next? What Louis needed now was an exam. The moment he said that, Lee Se-hoon put on a black glove. This exam would be oral, so Louis had better prepare herself mentally. Soon news of Louis' challenge letter spread, and people started finding the situation suspicious. Why had the sponsored weapon exploded right before the outstanding scholarship selection exam? Did no one else find that strange? How could a famous blacksmithing family like Barmood make such a basic mistake? And considering their relationship with the Kruger family, didn't a conspiracy make far more sense than an accident? If not for that incident, Louis should have been chosen as the scholarship student. Those discussions soon reached Getz's ears, and the rumors continued spreading. Even his father heard about it and cursed him. "You useless fool. You couldn't even deal with one person, and now you've created this mess." Getz had a splitting headache as well. He had not expected things to turn out like this, but his father could not interfere. If the family stepped in, it would only make things worse. So Getz had to handle it himself. Of course, if Getz's father acted, he could instantly suppress the problem. But that was exactly what Getz's brothers wanted to see. If Getz was removed and his standing fell, his brothers could move in and take control of UD Group's subsidiary. At that moment, someone entered from behind. It was Pierre Barmut. His arrival only made Getz angrier. "Did you come here just to announce to the whole world that we were the ones who dealt with that insect half a year ago? Is that why you're here? Don't just stand there like a mute. Say something." As it turned out, Pierre Barmut had suddenly changed the plan back then, locking Louis in prison and trying to get her expelled. Originally, that should have been the end of it. Pierre Barmut admitted it was his mistake, and he had nothing else to say. But Getz did not want an apology. He wanted a proper solution. If Pierre could not come up with one, then he could prepare to be kicked out of the succession line along with him. Then, Pierre Barmut suddenly smiled. "Don't worry. This time, I have a way to finish her completely."